Tonight, we will explore one of the most ancient and deepest of questions. Who are you really? Beneath the roles and the habits, beneath the opinions you carry and the history you have lived through, beneath even the body you have watched change year after year, what is actually here? Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The Buddhist tradition has an answer to this question. It says that you already know, that somewhere beneath the layers of protection you built across a lifetime, something precious remains, whole and undamaged. The ancient masters say that what you truly are was never added to you, and so it can never be taken from you. It is not lost, it has only been covered. And tonight is not a search, it is a remembering. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to listen. You do not need to follow every word or hold on to any of it. If sleep comes, let it come. The teachings will keep unfolding either way, and what they speak to in you was here long before tonight. So let the body settle wherever it has come to rest. Let the day loosen and fall away. Let the breath find its own slow rhythm. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. The Zen tradition carries a phrase that has been passed from teacher to student for centuries. O nobly born, remember who you truly are. That phrase points at a truth the Buddhist path returns to again and again. The deepest work is not about becoming someone new. It is about uncovering who was always there. Beneath the roles you have learned to play, beneath the defenses you built because life required them, beneath the name the world calls you by, there is an older name, a truer one that belongs to who you were before the world told you who to be. Long ago, in a kingdom set among mountains, a prince quarreled bitterly with his father the king. He was young, proud, and full of certainty that he had been wronged, and in the heat of that certainty he left the palace and did not return. He walked through the capital without looking back. He crossed the farmlands beyond the walls. He kept walking until the mountains were behind him and the roads became unfamiliar, and still he did not stop. He had no plan and no destination. He only knew he would not go back. Weeks became months. Months folded into years. He traded his fine clothes for simpler ones, and then for rougher ones still, and then for whatever he could find. He worked odd jobs in market towns. He slept in doorways when the weather turned cold. He carried sacks of rice for merchants who did not know his name and would not have believed it if they had. Slowly, the memory of the palace grew distant, like a story someone had once told him about another person's life. He stopped thinking of himself as a prince. He stopped thinking of the quarrel. He was simply a tired man with dust in his hair and calluses on his hands, moving from one town to the next, hoping for a meal and a dry place to rest. Meanwhile, in the palace he had left behind, the king grew old. The quarrel that had seemed so important all those years ago had lost its edges. All that remained was the absence of his son, and the ache of it deepened with every passing season. At last, the king called for his oldest minister, a man who had served the family for decades. "Find him," the king said. "I do not care how long it takes. Find him and bring him home." The minister traveled for months, following traces and rumors and half-remembered sightings. He searched through market towns and harbor cities. He asked at inns and temples. And one evening, in a dusty settlement far from anywhere that mattered, he saw a man sitting on the ground outside a tea shop, eating a bowl of rice with his fingers. The man's clothes were patched and stained. His face was weathered beyond his years. But the minister had known this face since the day it was born. He approached slowly. The man looked up with the blank expression of someone accustomed to being overlooked, and then looked away again. The minister lowered himself to one knee. He said nothing about the kingdom. He said nothing about the quarrel or the king's forgiveness. Instead, he spoke a single word. It was the name the prince's mother had called him when he was small, the name she whispered when she carried him through the garden in the early morning, the name no one outside the innermost rooms of the palace had ever heard. The effect was immediate. The man's hands stopped moving. His eyes widened. Something behind his face shifted, as if a door long sealed had swung open from inside. "You know that name," the minister said softly. "She used to sing it," the man whispered. His voice cracked on the word. "When she put me to bed, she used to sing it." "She did. And you are still the one she sang it to." The man looked down at his stained hands, at the borrowed bowl, at the dust on his feet. Nothing around him had changed, but something inside him had remembered, and the remembering was like coming home after a journey so long he had forgotten there was a home to return to. He did not need to be given anything. Everything that mattered had been there the whole time, waiting beneath the dust and the forgetting. This is what the Buddhist tradition means when it speaks of original nature, or Buddha nature. It is not something earned through years of practice. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is what was always present, covered over by the layers life required. The child learning to toughen up for the schoolyard. The young person learning to perform confidence they do not feel. The adult learning to wear the face that gets through the workday. Each layer was necessary. Each layer did its job, but none of them was ever who you actually are. The old Buddhist texts use the phrase, "O nobly born," as a form of address, precisely because they are speaking to what is beneath the layers, the part that was there before the first defense was built. That phrase does not say, "O you who have worked hard enough to be worthy." It says, "O you who were noble from the beginning." It speaks to the tenderness that existed before it learned to hide, the openness that was present before life gave it reasons to close. Everyone recognizes what happened to the prince, because everyone has lived some version of it. There was a time when you did not guard your words before speaking them. A time when joy or grief moved through you without editing. A time when you had not yet learned to scan a room before deciding which version of yourself to present. That openness did not disappear. It was covered carefully, and the covering was a kind of wisdom in its own right. The child who learns to be cautious around an unpredictable adult is being intelligent. The teenager who learns to mask vulnerability in a harsh school is surviving. The adult who learns to separate professional composure from private feeling is adapting. Each layer served a purpose. Each one protected the gold. But there comes a point in many lives where the layers start to feel heavier than what they were built to keep out. The armor that once protected begins to constrict. And the path does not ask you to tear it off. It asks something softer, to notice that you are wearing it, and to feel, beneath the weight, that the one inside the armor never needed fixing. The defenses can soften on their own, gradually, in the presence of safety and attention, the way ice melts when the season turns, because warmth reached it, not because anyone struck it. There is a difference between building a better self and remembering an original one. Building assumes something is missing. Remembering assumes something is present but forgotten. The entire trajectory of the path changes depending on which assumption you begin with. If something is missing, you spend your life chasing it. If something is forgotten, you only need to stop and look and listen for the name you already know. And the minister in the story knew exactly which name to speak. He did not call the prince by his title. He did not remind him of his rank or his possessions or his duties. He spoke the name the prince's mother used when she was closest and most loving, because that name bypassed every defense the years had built. It went straight to the place inside that had never changed. Everyone has a version of that name, a word or a tone or a memory that reaches past everything they have become and touches who they were at the very start. There is a story from the Lotus Sutra, one of the great texts of the Buddhist canon, that carries this teaching in a different form. Two friends had known each other since boyhood, but their lives had taken different paths. One had prospered. He lived in a large house in a trading city, with fine food and beautiful things around him. The other had struggled. He moved from place to place, working when he could, carrying everything he owned in a worn cloth bag, sleeping where he found shelter. One evening, the poor traveler arrived in his old friend's city, too tired to go further. By chance, or perhaps by something deeper than chance, he found his way to the rich man's door. His friend recognized him at once, overjoyed, and brought him inside. They sat together and talked through the evening, sharing food and wine and years of stories. The traveler had not eaten so well in a long time, and the warmth of the room and the fullness of his stomach pulled him into a deep sleep right there at the table. But in the middle of the night, a message arrived. The wealthy friend was called away on urgent business. He tried to wake the traveler, but the man slept too deeply to be roused. The friend stood over him for a long moment, thinking. He wanted to give the traveler something that would change his life, something that would end the wandering and the want. But there was no time for explanation, and the man would not wake. So the friend did something extraordinary. He took a jewel of immense value, one of the rarest and most precious stones he possessed, and he sewed it carefully into the lining of the traveler's worn coat, stitching the fabric closed so that it could not be felt through the cloth. Then he left. The traveler woke the next morning to an empty house. He gathered his things, put on his old coat, and walked back out into the world. He did not know the jewel was there. He had no reason to check. And so the years continued as before. He moved from town to town. He worked for his meals. He went without when work was scarce. He grew thinner and more tired and older, and he never once imagined that he was carrying a fortune against his own body, hidden in the folds of the coat he wore every day. Years later, by the same kind of chance, the two friends met again. The wealthy man was stunned. His friend looked worse than before, more worn, more weathered, closer to the end of his strength. "My old friend," he said, taking the traveler's rough hands. "Why are you living like this? What choice do I have?" The traveler said, "This is the life I was given." The wealthy friend shook his head. He took the coat gently from the traveler's shoulders, turned it inside out, and with careful fingers opened the stitching along the inner seam. There, still bright, still perfect, untouched by all the years of dust and weather, was the jewel. "I sewed this into your coat the night you fell asleep in my home," he said. "It has been with you all along. You were never as poor as you believed." The traveler held the jewel in his open palm. It had been there through every hungry night, every cold morning, every moment he had told himself that life had given him nothing. He had been carrying abundance against his own skin and had not known it. The Lotus Sutra tells this story as a teaching about Buddha nature. The jewel is the original completeness that every person carries. The poverty is the belief that it is absent. And the years of wandering are the long search for something that was, the entire time, closer than close, hidden in what you already wear, in the life you already live. What the story makes plain is that nothing needs to be added. The jewel does not need to be polished or improved. It does not need to be earned. It only needs to be seen, to be noticed, to be recognized as having been there all along. And the recognition itself changes everything. The traveler's circumstances did not shift in that moment. He was still the same man, in the same worn clothes, standing on the same road. But the meaning of his life had transformed completely because he finally understood what he was carrying. The friend who sewed the jewel into the coat did so out of love, silently, without needing the traveler to know or to thank him. He trusted that the gift would be discovered when the time was right. This is how the Buddhist tradition describes the relationship between a person and their own Buddha nature. It was placed there, so to speak, before you had any say in the matter. It was always part of you, woven into the very fabric of your being, so close that you overlooked it the same way you overlook the air you breathe. And the moment of discovery does not add a single thing. It simply opens your eyes to what was already touching your skin. This is different from the way most of the world teaches growth. Most approaches say, here is what is wrong with you, and here is the program to fix it. The Buddhist tradition says something far more radical. It says there was never anything wrong with you. There was only forgetting. And the path home is not a construction project. It is a remembering. There is an old Indian saying that when a baby is still in the womb, it sings a song. The song goes, "Oh, do not let me forget who I really am." And then, when the baby is born and takes its first breath, the song changes. It becomes, "Oh dear, I am forgetting already." The whole journey of a human life, from that angle, is the long way back to the song you were singing before you were born. The prince remembers when he hears his mother's name. The traveler remembers when the coat is turned inside out. And in both stories, what they find is not something new. It is something so old and so familiar that it feels, in the moment of rediscovery, as if it had been calling to them the entire time. Right now, without effort, there may be a sense of something in you that has remained steady through every change your life has brought. Behind the roles and the moods and the defenses, behind the face you show the world, something has been present since the beginning. It does not need to be found or built. It is here already, the way the jewel was always in the coat. There is nothing to do with this except to notice it. To let the attention rest on whatever in you feels oldest and most familiar, the part that was there before you learned to be afraid, before you learned to perform, before you learned your first defense. In an ordinary evening, this might appear as a feeling of simple aliveness, the sense of being here that does not depend on mood or circumstance. It might appear as a warmth in the chest, or as a familiarity with your own presence that runs deeper than anything you could put into words. It is not a grand experience. It is the most ordinary thing in the world, which is exactly why it has been so easy to overlook. It was never damaged by what happened to you. It was never diminished by the hard years or the confusing ones. It has been here all along, sewn into the lining of every day you have ever lived, waiting for you to remember its name. Take a breath. Let that land wherever it lands. There is more to explore together, and it will be here when you are ready. The Buddha once described feelings as travelers passing through a guest house. Sensations arrive, stay for a time, and leave again. Aches come and go. Energy rises and fades. The body itself changes continuously, renewing and repairing itself down to its smallest parts, year after year. And yet, through all of that change, something has remained present, watching, aware. The body has aged, but the one who notices the aging has a strange quality of timelessness about it. Everyone has felt this at least once. You catch your reflection somewhere unexpected, a shop window, a photograph taken years ago, and for a moment, there is a gap between what you see and what you feel. The face has changed. The hair has changed. But inside, behind the eyes, something feels exactly the same as it did at 20, at 15, at 10. As if the one looking out from behind the face never received the memo about getting older. That gap between the changing reflection and the unchanging observer is one of the oldest subjects in the contemplative traditions. And it opens a question so simple it is easy to miss. If the body changes but you do not feel changed, then perhaps you are not the body. Perhaps you are the one who is looking. In the forests of ancient India, a young monk climbed the mountain path to the hut of an old master. He had come with his companion, both of them eager to learn, and the question they carried was the deepest one they knew. What is the true self? The old master did not answer right away. He had them wash and eat. He let them settle into the rhythm of the forest, the calls of birds, the wind moving through the bamboo. Only after the evening had softened into near darkness did he speak. "Come," he said. He placed a wide clay bowl on the floor of the hut and filled it with still rainwater. Then he lit a small lamp and held it so that both young men could see their own faces reflected on the surface. "Look carefully," the master said. "What you see there is the self." The first monk peered into the bowl and saw his own face looking back at him, clear and complete. He smiled. "I understand," he said. "The self is this face, this body. I am what I see." He bowed, thanked the master, and descended the mountain the following morning, content with his answer. He spent the rest of his years tending to the body as though it were the whole of his identity, devoted to its health and appearance and comfort. But the second monk did not follow him down. He stood on the mountain path as the dawn light spread through the trees, and he felt troubled. Something did not sit right. He turned the teaching over in his mind, and a question formed that he could not release. He walked back to the hut. "If the self is what I see in the water," he said, "then when this face grows old, the self grows old. When this body becomes ill, the self becomes ill. And when this body dies," he paused, "then the self dies with it. Is that true?" The master looked at him for a long moment and said, "Stay." The young monk stayed. Years passed. He practiced. He watched the seasons change the mountain and felt the seasons change his body. He returned to the master again and again, and each time the master pointed him toward a deeper answer, and each time the answer eventually dissolved under the monk's honesty, because every answer that could be seen or touched or described was still an object, still something that could change and pass away. One autumn afternoon, many years into this process, the monk sat with the master beside the same clay bowl. His face in the water was different now. The years showed. Lines had formed around his eyes. His hair had begun to thin. "Look again," the master said. The monk looked. He saw the older face. "Now," the master said, "tell me, who is looking?" The monk opened his mouth to answer and stopped. The face in the water was an image. The lamp was an object. The bowl was clay. But the awareness that saw the face, registered the lamp, knew the bowl. Where was that? He looked for it as he would look for his own eyes, and he could not find it because it was not an object. It was not in the water. It was not in the face. It was the looking itself. That, the master said softly, is what does not age. That is what cannot be ill. That awareness, the knowing, that knows but is never known as a thing, that is closer to the self than any reflection has ever been. This is one of the great insights of the Buddhist contemplative tradition. The eye cannot see itself. You can look at your hand, your foot, any part of your body, and that act of looking places you, the seer, in a position that is always behind and beyond what is seen. The moment you try to turn around and find the one who is looking, you find nothing, because the looker is never on the side of the objects. It is the open space in which objects appear. This is why the persistent monk could not be satisfied with the face in the water. The face is an object. It can be seen, which means it is something in awareness, and therefore cannot be awareness itself. The master led him through layer after layer of experience, peeling each one away, until the monk stopped looking for awareness as a thing and recognized it as the looking itself. The Buddha taught the same principle with a characteristic directness. He described 5 groups of experience, the 5 aggregates, the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Each one, he said, is impermanent. Each one arises and passes. And if each one arises and passes, then none of them can be the self, because the self would have to be present through all the changes. What is present through all the changes is the awareness that witnesses them, and that awareness is not an object anyone can point to, any more than the flame can burn itself, or the blade can cut itself. Modern neuroscience has arrived, through entirely different means, at a finding that would have made the old master smile. After more than a century of searching, brain researchers have concluded that there is no single location in the physical brain where a self can be found. There is no command center, no control room, no little person inside the head directing the show. The brain is an extraordinarily complex web of processes, but no one process is the self. The self, as a fixed thing, simply does not appear. The Buddhist tradition reached this same conclusion thousands of years earlier through direct observation rather than laboratory equipment. And the finding is the same. There is awareness, vast and continuous. There are experiences, rising and falling within it. But there is no fixed entity sitting at the center of it all. There is only the knowing. And the knowing does not age, does not arrive, does not depart. It is here, right now, as present as it was when you were 5 years old, looking out at the world with the same unbroken openness, even as the face it looked through has changed beyond recognition. This is what gives the body ages, but you do not feeling its uncanny accuracy. It is not a trick of memory or a failure to accept reality. It is a direct perception of something true. The body belongs to time. Awareness does not. The body is born, grows, weathers, and eventually returns to the earth. But the awareness that watched all of that happen never entered the sequence. It was here before the first memory, and its nature has not changed since. A young monk, devoted and sincere, had spent years in practice with an old master. He had studied the sutras, sat for long hours in meditation, and felt a growing confidence in his understanding. One afternoon, he approached his master beneath a Bodhi tree at the edge of the village. "Please," he said, "show me the nature of illusion. I have read about it. I have heard you teach about it, but I want to know it directly." The master looked at him with calm eyes. "Very well," he said. "But first, I am thirsty. Would you go down to the village well and bring me a cup of water?" The monk bowed and set off toward the village. It was not far. The well stood in the center of the settlement, shaded by a broad fig tree. As the monk drew the water, he noticed a young woman approaching with a clay jar balanced on her shoulder. She had warm eyes and a steady way of moving. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, and something in that smile caught hold of him in a way he did not expect. They spoke. She told him about her family, the fields they worked, the harvest they were preparing for. Her voice had a kindness to it that made him want to stay and listen. He stayed. He helped her carry the jar home. He met her father, who was welcoming and generous. When evening came, the family invited him to share their meal. When morning came, they invited him to help in the fields. When the season turned, the young woman's father offered his blessing, and the monk, who had by then forgotten the cup of water entirely, married the woman and made his life among her people. Years passed. He built a house. He planted rice. Children were born to them, a daughter and then a son, and he loved them with a fullness he had never imagined possible. He watched them grow. He watched the lines appear on his wife's face and felt the same lines forming on his own. He forgot the monastery. He forgot the master. He forgot the question he had asked. This was his life, and it was real, and it was enough. Then one year the rains came harder than anyone could remember. The river swelled beyond its banks. The water rose through the village in the night, dark and fast and heavy. He gathered his children in his arms and reached for his wife's hand, but the current was too strong. One by one, everything he loved was carried beyond his reach into the darkness. He stood alone on the riverbank in the grey early morning, emptied of everything, his clothes heavy with water, his arms empty. And then, softly, a hand touched his shoulder. "Child," said a familiar voice behind him, "where is my water? You have been gone half an hour." He turned. The master sat beneath the same Bodhi tree, in the same afternoon light, in the same posture as before. The shadows had barely moved. The village was whole. The well stood untouched. No flood had come, no family had lived, no years had passed. It had all unfolded in the space between one breath and the next. And no one had been harmed, because none of it had happened. The wife, the children, the house, the harvest, the rising water, all of it had been as real as a vivid dream and as insubstantial. The monk stood in the warm afternoon, shaking, changed forever, and the master simply waited, as if nothing more needed to be said. This is a teaching about absorption. The monk did not choose to forget. He was drawn in, gradually, by the warmth and beauty of what appeared before him, until the story became his entire world, and there was no room left to ask who was watching the story unfold. This is what happens every day, in smaller and less dramatic ways. A worry takes hold and fills the mind completely, and for those minutes or hours there is nothing else. No room, no body, no breath, only the worry. An argument replays itself on a loop, and the whole world shrinks to two voices and a grievance. A plan for the future absorbs every ounce of attention until the present moment vanishes entirely, replaced by an imagined tomorrow that has not arrived and may never arrive in the form imagined. Each of these is a small version of the monk's lifetime at the village. The mind enters a story so completely that it forgets anything else exists. And then something breaks the spell. A bird calls. A door closes somewhere in the house. Someone says your name. And there is that moment, the one everyone knows, where you blink and say, I was completely lost in that. In that single moment of recognition, the whole landscape shifts. The worry is still there, but now it is something you are aware of, rather than something you are inside of. The argument is still playing, but now there is space around it. You have stepped back, without meaning to, into the position of the one who is looking. That moment happens dozens of times a day, if you start to notice it. You are deep in a train of thought, and then the thought releases, and for a second there is just open awareness before the next thought arrives. You are caught in a feeling, and then the feeling lifts, and in the gap, you can sense the difference between the feeling and the one who felt it. Each of these small awakenings is a tiny version of the monk hearing the master's voice on the riverbank. Each one is the hand on the shoulder, the half hour returning, the discovery that you were never inside the story. You were always here. The master's touch on the monk's shoulder is that moment. And the teaching is this: you are never the story. You are the awareness in which the story appears. The story can be beautiful or painful, long or short, and it will always feel completely real while you are inside it. But the one who wakes from it was never in it. That one was here the whole time, as steady and as present as the afternoon light falling on the Bodhi tree. This awareness is the knowing itself, prior to what is known. It does not judge or prefer. It does not age or diminish. It is present in every experience, never separate from what arises, yet never reducible to it. Right now, wherever you are resting, there are sounds. There may be the hum of a machine, or the movement of air, or the distant life of a street. And there is something that hears them. You did not have to turn it on. You did not have to prepare. The hearing is simply here, open, receiving whatever arises. That hearing does not belong to the sounds. The sounds change constantly, but the hearing remains. Similarly, thoughts come and go, moods arrive and fade, sensations bloom and dissolve, but the awareness in which they all appear does not come and go. It is always already here. This is something you can rest in, the way a bird rests on a current of warm air without needing to understand what holds it up. There is no effort needed. The awareness is not something you have to create. It is what you have been looking out of your entire life, and it has never once been absent. If you like, let the attention soften now. Let it widen beyond any single object, any single thought, and rest as the open space in which everything is happening. That space is not empty. It is full of knowing, and it has been here since before you can remember. When you are ready, we will continue together, a little further along the path. In the Thai forest tradition, there is a teaching that distinguishes between the contents of the mind and the mind itself, the way one might distinguish between the clouds and the sky they pass through. Clouds come in every shape, dark, bright, fast-moving, slow. They can fill the entire field of vision until nothing else seems to exist. But the sky is never the clouds. It does not darken when a storm rolls in. It does not brighten when the clouds part. It is the space in which all weather happens, and it is untouched by anything that moves through it. The previous stretch of this journey explored the discovery of awareness, the moment when attention shifts from the content of experience to the fact of experiencing itself. But that discovery, as powerful as it is, raises a further question. If awareness is always here, if it precedes every thought and survives every mood, what happens when someone brings their finest, deepest, most extraordinary experiences to that realization? Do the peak moments of a life, the visions, the breakthroughs, the rare states of clarity, carry a special claim on awareness? Or are they too just weather? This is the question that transforms the path from a search for better experiences into something far more freeing. In the deep forests of Southeast Asia, in the era when monks still wandered for years at a time through wild jungle and mountain caves, a young monk walked for hundreds of miles to find a master whose reputation had spread across the countryside. This young monk was no beginner. He had spent years in the most remote and difficult conditions, practicing with fierce dedication. He had fasted for long stretches. He had sat through nights of cold and fear. He had practiced mantra and concentration until his mind became so still that extraordinary states began to open within him. Fields of light, waves of rapture, long stretches of absorption so deep that hours passed like moments. He had studied the scriptures and could recite the teachings from memory. And he believed, with the earned confidence of someone who had worked very hard, that he had something real to show for his years of practice. When he finally arrived at the old master's dwelling, a simple hut beneath enormous trees, he paid his respects and then, with as much humility as his excitement allowed, began to tell his story. He described the cave where he had sat through a monsoon season without moving from his seat. He described the states of concentration, the light that filled his body, the bliss that poured through him like warm water, the visions of past lives, the experience of the mind seeming to leave the body entirely and hover above the forest like smoke. He described the night when the entire distinction between inner and outer seemed to dissolve, and there was only a vast, luminous stillness. The old master sat on the bare earth and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod or smile or show any sign of being impressed. He simply listened, his eyes steady, his hands still in his lap, as the evening deepened around them, and the sounds of the forest, the cicadas, the distant calls of night birds, filled the spaces between the young monk's words. When the young monk had finished, the old master was silent for a long time. The fire between them had burned down to embers. "These experiences you describe," he said at last. "The light, the rapture, the dissolution. They arose, yes?" "Yes," And they passed? The young monk hesitated. Yes, they passed. Then they are conditions, the master said. They arose because certain causes came together, and they passed because those causes changed. Beautiful conditions, yes. Rare ones. But conditions all the same, as temporary and as impersonal as the sound of that bird in the trees just now. He paused. You have been collecting experiences the way a merchant collects fine cloth, and you have brought your collection here for me to admire. The young monk felt the heat rise in his face, but said nothing. The real question, the old master said, his voice as even and as ordinary as if he were discussing the weather, is not what happened to you. The real question is, to whom did it happen? The forest pressed in around them, alive with small sounds. The young monk sat with the question. It was not like the other questions he had wrestled with. It did not ask him to understand anything, or remember anything, or achieve anything. It asked him to turn around, to stop looking at the experiences arrayed before him and instead look toward whatever it was that had been present throughout all of them, the knowing that knew the light and the bliss and the dissolution, the knowing that had been there before any of it arose and remained after all of it passed. He did not find an answer that night. He found something better. He found the end of the search. When the young monk woke at dawn, the forest was full of mist and pale light. The old master was already sitting outside the hut, drinking water from a clay cup. The monk sat down beside him. The question from the night before had not left. It had, if anything, deepened. But there was a difference. It no longer felt like a problem to solve. It felt like a door that had opened. You said my experiences were conditions, the monk began. They are. Then what is left when all conditions pass? The master set down his cup. What was here before we started talking? The monk paused. He had been so focused on the words that he had not noticed. But even before the conversation began, before the question was asked, before the first word of the evening's long account, there had been something. An awareness, a knowing, present before the fire was lit, present through every story, present now in the morning mist. It had not arrived with any experience, and it had not departed when the experience ended. It was simply here. That, the master said, watching his face, is what the tradition calls the one who knows. It is not a thing. You cannot hold it or describe it. But it is the ground of every experience you will ever have. The rapture passed through it. The fear passed through it. And it remained unchanged, like a mirror that holds every image and is stained by none. He picked up his cup again. You do not need to chase extraordinary states. They may come, and you can appreciate them the way you appreciate a sunset. But they are not the point. The point is the knowing. Rest there, and you are free wherever you are, in any condition, pleasant or difficult. The one who knows does not depend on conditions. This is one of the most radical teachings in the Buddhist tradition, and one of the most freeing. It says that the goal of practice is not to produce better experiences. It is to recognize what is already present in every experience, the awareness that is aware. Most of spiritual life, honestly, is spent collecting experiences. A beautiful meditation, a powerful retreat, a moment of clarity so vivid it feels like touching something divine. And each of these experiences carries an invisible hook, the desire to have it again, the fear of losing it, the quiet ranking of this state against that one, this retreat against the last one. The mind becomes a curator of peak moments, arranging them on shelves and polishing them and worrying about the ones that are missing. The old master's question cuts through all of this. To whom did it happen? The rapture came to someone. The fear came to someone. The long years of effort and the brief seconds of grace both happened within something. That something was never changed by what passed through it, any more than the sky is changed by the clouds. And it is available right now, in this ordinary moment, with nothing extraordinary happening at all. The personality does not disappear when this is seen. You do not stop being yourself. You stop mistaking yourself for the weather. The likes and dislikes still arise. The habits and preferences and memories continue, but they are held more lightly, seen from a wider view, the way someone standing on a hilltop can watch the fog move through the valley below without believing the whole world has vanished. The shift is in perspective, and the relief of it is enormous. Freedom, in this sense, is not something added. It is something subtracted. Entanglement is released. The constant effort to maintain a particular state, to hold on to the good moments and push away the bad ones, is set down. And what remains, the simple open knowing, turns out to have been here all along, effortlessly, like the hum of your own heartbeat, that you can hear only once the room has grown still. There is a story from the earliest texts of the Buddhist tradition about a man who traveled an extraordinary distance because a single honest question would not let him rest. He had been a merchant once, a trader on the sea routes, successful and bold. On his 8th voyage, his ship broke apart in a storm, and he was carried to a distant shore with nothing but his life. He had no clothes, no cargo, no name anyone would recognize. He wrapped himself in strips of bark pulled from the trees along the beach and wandered inland, hungry and lost. The villagers who found him looked at his strange appearance and his sun-darkened skin and assumed he must be a holy man, some kind of wandering ascetic who had renounced everything. They brought him food. They brought him offerings. They asked him for blessings and guidance, and he, having no other way to survive, accepted their reverence. Over time, he settled into the role. Years passed. He became known throughout the region as a teacher, though he had never studied under anyone and had no training in the spiritual life. But late at night, alone in the hut the villagers had built for him, the question he could not answer pressed against his chest. Am I what they believe me to be? Have I earned any of this, or am I still the same lost man in borrowed bark? He sat with this question for months. The honest answer, when it finally came, was no. He was living inside a role that did not belong to him, and the discomfort of that dishonesty had become unbearable. So he left. He walked away from the offerings and the blessings and the hut, and set out across the country to find the one person he had heard could answer the question he could not stop asking. It took him weeks of walking. He crossed mountains and rivers and long stretches of dry plain. And at last, in a city he had never visited, he found the Buddha walking through the streets on the morning alms round, a bowl in his hands, moving from door to door. The man fell to his knees. "Please," he said, "teach me. I have come a very long way, and I need to understand what is real." The Buddha looked at him, calm and kind, and said, "This is not the time. I am on my arms round." The man stood and waited. When the Buddha passed again, he knelt once more. "Please, I have nothing but this question. Life is uncertain. No one knows how long any of us will last. If you do not teach me now, the chance may not come again. Again the Buddha declined. The man knelt a third time. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of years of pretending. Please, I have walked across this country because I could not live inside a lie any longer. Tell me what is real. The Buddha stopped walking. He turned to face the man fully, and in the still morning air, with the sounds of the city around them and the light spreading along the rooftops, he gave one of the shortest and most complete teachings ever recorded. Then train yourself in this, the Buddha said. In the seen, let there be only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. In the known, only the known. When for you there is only the seen in the seen, only the heard in the heard, only the sensed in the sensed, only the known in the known, then you will not be in that. And when you are not in that, you will not be there. And when you are not there, you will be neither here, nor beyond, nor between the two. And that, exactly, is the end of suffering. The man stood in the morning street. The teaching entered him the way rain enters dry ground, all at once and completely, filling what had been waiting to be filled. There was nothing to add and nothing to take away. In the seen, only the seen. No one layering meaning on top of it. No one building a self out of it. No one standing behind the experience claiming ownership. Just the bare fact of life, arising and passing, free. He bowed. He straightened. He walked on, and the long search was over. The teaching the Buddha gave is the same teaching the old forest master gave, only compressed to its essence. In the seen, only the seen. In other words, experience happens. Sounds arise, sights appear, thoughts form and dissolve. That is the river. And you are not in the river. You are what the river moves through. The moment you add a self to experience, you create entanglement. I am seeing this becomes I like this, or I fear this, or this is happening to me. The simple fact of seeing becomes a story about a person who is seeing, and that person has a past and a future and 1,000 preferences, and now the whole machinery of wanting and resisting has been set in motion. But in the seen, only the seen, that machinery never starts. There is just the experience, clean and complete, and the awareness that receives it, open and untouched. This is what the one who knows has always been doing. Every moment, in the background of every experience, there has been a knowing that did not add anything to what it knew. It did not say mine. It did not say I. It simply knew, the way a mirror simply reflects. And when the long habit of claiming and narrating and defending is set down, even for a moment, what remains is peace so natural, it does not feel like an achievement. It feels like coming home. The personality still lives. The sense of humor is still there, the preferences and the history and the face you recognize in photographs. None of that goes anywhere, but it is held differently. It is seen from the position of the sky rather than from inside the cloud. And from the sky, every cloud is welcome, and none of them is a crisis, and the open blue was never once in danger. Wherever you are resting now, there is experience happening, breath moving, body settling, perhaps a sound from somewhere beyond the walls, or the soft texture of whatever surface holds you. And there is something that knows all of this, without effort, without agenda, without any need to change it. That knowing is not separate from you. It is the real you, the one who has been here through every change, every role, every story. You do not need to find it. It is what is finding everything else. You do not need to create it. It is what is aware, right now, of these very words. Rest here. Let the breath breathe itself. Let the knowing know. There is nowhere else to go. When this pause has settled, we will move together into what comes next. The Buddha taught that of all the forms of clinging, the deepest is the clinging to a self, the holding of a body, a set of feelings, a collection of roles, a name, a history, as me and mine. We hold these things so tightly that we forget they are things we are holding. They begin to feel like what we are, as solid and as permanent as bone, when in truth they are closer to clothing, put on for a season, useful for a purpose, and eventually set down. What the previous explorations have opened is the recognition of an awareness behind every experience. But that recognition raises a practical question. If awareness is the constant and everything else is changing, what are all these identities we carry through our days? The parent, the professional, the citizen, the friend, the person with a particular history and a particular set of opinions. Where do those fit? Are they real? Are they obstacles? Or are they something more interesting than either? Costumes worn by the one who knows, useful and even beautiful, so long as the wearer remembers they can be taken off. In a province of ancient China, there lived a sage who had spent many years in the mountains. He was known in the high valleys as a man of great learning, and when he traveled to the villages below, people bowed to him in the road and offered him the best seat at their tables. His robes were fine, his bearing upright, and his reputation preceded him wherever he went. But a question had been forming in him over many seasons, and it would not leave him alone. He wondered whether the respect he received belonged to him or to his robes, whether the kindness of strangers was given to his character or to the signals of status he carried on his person. He wanted to know if the goodness he believed existed in people would survive a change of costume. So one morning, at the gates of a large trading city, he stopped. He found a beggar resting against the wall and offered a trade, his fine mountain robes for the beggar's torn and dusty clothes. The beggar, astonished, accepted, and the sage, now dressed in rags, walked into the city as a different man. The difference was immediate. Merchants who would have offered him tea now looked past him. Innkeepers who would have cleared a room now waved him away. He walked the same streets, carried the same mind, spoke with the same voice, but the city responded to the costume, and the costume said he was no one. Door after door closed. People crossed to the other side of the lane when they saw him coming. The same man who had been bowed to the day before was now invisible. He spent the day wandering, hungry and overlooked, until late in the afternoon he came to a small inn at the far end of the market district. The door was open. Inside, a man with a broad, plain face was wiping down tables. The innkeeper looked up. He did not seem to see the torn clothes. He saw a tired person who needed to sit down. "Come in," he said. "There is a warm seat by the wall. I will bring you something to eat." "I have nothing to pay you with," the sage said. "I did not ask for anything," the innkeeper replied. "Sit. Rest." And so the sage sat, and the innkeeper brought him rice and broth and tea, and they talked as the evening settled over the city. The sage returned the next day, and the next, and each time the innkeeper welcomed him exactly as before, with the same warmth, the same bowl, the same seat by the wall. He never asked his guest's name. He never asked where he came from or what had brought him to such a state. He simply saw a person and responded with kindness, and the kindness did not depend on anything the person was wearing. On his last evening in the city, the sage asked the innkeeper for a brush and ink. He painted, on the inn's back wall, a pair of cranes, delicate and alive, their wings half spread as if about to lift from the plaster. The innkeeper watched in silence. When the painting was finished, the sage clapped his hands once, and the cranes stepped down from the wall. They stretched their wings, they turned their long necks, and they danced across the floor of the inn, light as paper, alive as birds. The innkeeper stood frozen, his mouth open. Then the cranes folded their wings around the old sage, and together they rose through the open doorway and into the evening sky, and he was gone. The innkeeper never saw him again. But people came from all over the province to see the cranes painted on the wall, and they asked who had made them. All the innkeeper could say was that it had been a man in torn clothes, a hungry stranger who needed a bowl of rice. The costume fooled everyone except the one person who was not looking at the costume. The innkeeper saw through the rags the same way a clear lake shows the stones beneath its surface. He did not sort people by their appearance because he was not using appearance as his primary information. He was responding to something simpler and more direct, the fact of another person, present and in need. The Buddhist teaching on identity says something remarkably similar. The roles we carry, parent, teacher, healer, provider, are like the sage's robes, real in the sense that they serve a function, but unreal in the sense that they can be exchanged. A person who comes home from a day of professional authority and continues to issue directives at the dinner table has confused the costume with the wearer. The role was appropriate at work. It is a burden at home. The healthy movement is to take it off at the door, the way you take off a coat, and to step into the next room as something lighter, something closer to what you actually are, beneath any particular function. Much of modern life pushes in the opposite direction. The marketplace says, you are what you own. The career says, you are what you produce. The social world says, you are how others perceive you. Each of these voices hands you a label and asks you to make it permanent. And each label, once accepted, begins to shape what you can see and feel and do. A person who believes I am a failure will interpret ambiguous events as evidence of failure. A person who believes I am indispensable will exhaust themselves maintaining the performance. The label writes the life, and the life seems to confirm the label, and the whole loop feels like reality when it is actually a costume worn so long it has started to feel like skin. This applies to every label. Young, old, successful, struggling, healthy, unwell. Each one is a description of a temporary condition, and each one has a strange power to become an identity if it is held long enough. A person who has been ill for a long time may start to organize their entire sense of self around the illness, until sick person feels like the deepest truth about them, when in reality it is a condition the deeper self is experiencing. A person who has achieved a great deal may build their identity so thoroughly around their achievements that any threat to those achievements feels like a threat to their very existence. The costume has fused with the skin, and removing it feels impossible. But the teaching is clear. You are not the costume. You are the one who wears it. And the one who wears it can set it down. In the same valley where the stone Buddha face watched over the fields and the farms, there lived a boy who had no extraordinary qualities and no particular ambitions. He was a farmer's son. He did his chores. He helped with the planting and the harvest. And every evening, when the day's work was finished, he sat on the hillside and looked up at the great stone face carved by time into the mountainside. The face was enormous, visible from every part of the valley. Its expression was one of deep patience and kindness, the sort of face that seemed to be looking at everything and everyone with the same steady warmth. An old prophecy, kept by the abbot of the valley's temple, said that one day a person would live in this valley whose face came to resemble the great stone Buddha, and that this person would be the noblest soul of their time. The boy loved the face. He looked at it the way other children looked at stars or distant mountains, with a kind of open longing that had no specific object. He did not want to be the person in the prophecy. He simply wanted to keep looking. As the years passed, the valley produced several famous sons and daughters. A merchant returned from distant cities with enormous wealth, and the people gathered and compared his face to the stone. But his eyes were sharp and restless, calculating the value of everything they fell on, and the abbot shook his head. A renowned magistrate passed through the valley on his way to the capital, his reputation for justice preceding him, and again the people gathered. But his jaw was set with authority, and his gaze carried the weight of judgments he had delivered, and the resemblance was not there. A brilliant minister of the court arrived, a man whose speeches could move crowds to tears, and the valley held its breath. But the minister's eloquence had a performance to it, a self-awareness that kept something in reserve, and the abbot shook his head once more. Through all of these arrivals and disappointments, the farmer's son continued his ordinary life. He planted. He harvested. He sat on the hillside in the evenings. He spoke with his neighbors in the way he had always spoken, simply, with attention, without trying to impress or persuade. He grew old. His face weathered. His hands became rough and steady. Then, one autumn evening, a celebrated poet visited the valley. He had traveled widely and written beautifully, and he had heard about the prophecy and the great stone face. He came to see both for himself. He climbed the hill at sunset and found the old farmer sitting there, as he had sat for decades, his face turned toward the mountain. The poet sat beside him. They watched the last light move across the stone face together. Then the farmer turned to greet the poet, and the poet's breath caught. In the warm light, the old man's face, lined and weathered by decades of patience and kindness and open attention, bore the unmistakable likeness of the great stone Buddha above them. The patience was the same. The gentleness was the same. The unguarded warmth was the same. "It is you," the poet said, his voice breaking. "It has been you all along." The old farmer looked at him with mild surprise, and then looked back up at the mountain and shook his head gently. He did not believe it. And perhaps that disbelief was itself the proof, because the stone face, too, had never seemed to know how beautiful it was. This story carries the Buddhist teaching into its most radical implication. Identity is shaped by what you contemplate. The farmer did not try to become the face. He simply looked at it, evening after evening, year after year, and the looking did the work. The patience he saw in the stone became the patience in his own expression. The kindness he received from that gaze became the kindness he offered to his neighbors. He was not performing a role. He had been slowly formed by what he loved, without effort and without strategy, the way a riverbed is shaped by the water that runs through it. The famous visitors had been shaped differently. The merchant was shaped by the marketplace, the magistrate by the courtroom, the minister by the crowd. Each of them had become the thing they spent their days contemplating: profit, judgment, persuasion. Their identities were real in the sense that they had been lived, but they were also borrowed. They belonged to the circumstances, and when the circumstances changed, the identity would have to change with them, or else become a prison. The farmer's identity was different because it was formed by contemplation of something that does not change. The Buddha face in the mountain does not fluctuate with the markets or shift with political winds. Its expression is the same in morning and evening, in summer and winter. And so the identity it formed in the farmer had that same quality of steadiness, a self that did not depend on external validation, that did not need to be anyone in particular, that simply was what it was and offered what it had. The old Zen teaching puts this directly: what you give your attention to, you become. A mind that spends its days in comparison becomes competitive. A mind that spends its days in worry becomes anxious. A mind that rests, even briefly, in the presence of something larger and more patient than itself begins to take on that quality. The farmer's evening practice on the hillside was not formal meditation. It was simply looking, with love, at something that embodied the qualities he did not know he was absorbing. And over a lifetime, the looking did what no amount of striving could have done. This is what remains when every label is set down for a moment. Behind the parent, the professional, the citizen, the struggler, the achiever, behind every name anyone has ever called you, there is someone who was shaped by what they loved. And that someone is closer to the real you than any role has ever been. Right now, in this resting place, it may be possible to sense the gap between the roles and the one who wears them. All of the identities of the day have been set aside for the evening, and what remains is simply this: a person, breathing, aware, present. Not performing anything, not maintaining any particular image. Just here. This is what you are before any label is put on. This is the face you had before the costumes arrived. It is the one the innkeeper would have recognized no matter what you were wearing. And it has the quality of the farmer's face on the hillside, shaped by what it has quietly loved, steady, unperforming, sufficient. The merchant's face needed the marketplace to make sense. The magistrate's face needed the courtroom. But this face, the one you carry right now in the dark, needs nothing. It belongs to no role and no occasion. It is simply yours. Let the breath settle. Let the roles rest where you left them. They will be there in the morning, ready to be picked up again when they are needed. But for now, there is only this: the one who is here, without a costume, without a name, without anything to prove. Stay with that as long as it feels natural. We will continue together when this stillness has found its own depth. From the Anguttara Nikaya, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's teachings, although we thought ourselves permanent, we are not. Although we thought ourselves settled, we are not. Although we thought we would last forever, we will not. These words carry no anger and no sorrow. They are simply a description of what is true, offered with the same calm directness with which someone might say, "The river moves." And that image, the river, was one of the Buddha's most frequent descriptions of what this human life actually is. He pointed away from the idea of a solid, settled self and toward moving water. A river, flowing, changing, carrying everything it touches from one moment to the next, never the same water twice. This is where the evening's exploration arrives, at the felt texture of impermanence. The earlier teachings pointed toward the awareness behind all experience, the one who knows, the sky behind the clouds. But the clouds themselves deserve close attention, because they are what daily life is made of, the body's sensations, the moods that shift without warning, the perceptions that color everything, the thoughts that rise and fall like weather. The Buddha described all of this as 5 rivers running together, and the teaching invites a particular relationship with them, to release the grip, to soften the resistance, and to watch them flow. In a market town in the shadow of a temple, a young weaver rented a loft above a quiet lane. She had learned morning sitting from the nuns at the temple down the hill, and she chose this particular space because it was still. Her loom stood at one end of the room, and her sitting cushion at the other, and between them she lived a life of careful rhythm, weaving through the day, sitting in silence before dawn. Then, during her first week, a blacksmith opened his forge directly below. The hammering began at sunrise and continued through the afternoon, a steady, heavy, ringing percussion that traveled up through the floorboards and into the loom and into her body. The vibrations shook her cups on their shelf. They rattled the wooden frame of the loom, and they filled her morning sitting with a wall of sound, so thick she could not find the breath beneath it. She tried everything she could think of. She stuffed raw wool into the gaps around the window frame. She changed her sitting hours to early evening when the forge was cold. She composed long speeches in her mind, detailing the blacksmith's selfishness and her own reasonable need for quiet. She imagined moving. She imagined confronting him. She lay awake in the evenings rehearsing arguments she would never deliver. Weeks passed, then months. The resistance did not lessen. If anything, it grew. The hammering had become a personal insult, a daily reminder that the world would not arrange itself for her comfort. The blacksmith had no idea she existed. He was simply doing his work. But in her mind, he had become an adversary, a presence whose every strike was aimed at her peace. One morning in late autumn, the hammering began as usual, and something in her broke open. She had been sitting with her eyes closed, trying to find the breath, and the anger rose so fast and so hot that it surprised her. Her jaw clenched. Her hands tightened into fists. Her chest burned. And then, because there was nowhere else to go with it, she stopped trying to sit properly and simply sat with what was actually happening. She felt the heat in her face. She felt the tightness in her shoulders. She felt the story, "He is ruining my life," loop through her mind like a chant. And she watched it. She did not try to fix it, or push it away, or replace it with something more spiritual. She just watched, the way the nuns had taught her to watch the breath, except now she was watching rage. The rage crested. It held at its peak for what felt like a long time, and then, without any decision on her part, it broke. Her eyes filled with tears. The tears were not about the blacksmith. They were older than that, connected to something she did not fully understand, a weariness with fighting, a grief for all the energy she had spent trying to make the world hold still. She cried for a while, and the hammering continued beneath her, and the two sounds, her weeping and the ringing of iron, occupied the same morning air without contradiction. When the tears passed, something had shifted. The hammering was still there, but it had become simply sound. It rang and faded, like a bell in a distant valley. It was part of the morning, the same as her breath and the creak of the loom and the call of the birds outside the window. It was no longer about her. It was just happening, the way weather happens, the way a river moves. Winter came. The forge fell cold. The blacksmith left the town for the season, and the loft was silent. She sat in the silence and noticed something she had not expected. The silence was different from the hammering, but it was not as much better as she would have predicted. It was mostly just different. One texture of sound had been replaced by another, and the awareness that received both had not changed at all. The Buddha described the first two of the 5 rivers as the river of the body and the river of feelings. The body is not the solid, stable thing it appears to be. Sit still long enough, and you begin to feel it as it actually is. A field of sensations, hot and cool, hard and soft, pressure and release, tingling and aching and buzzing, all of it moving, none of it fixed. What felt like a solid shoulder is, on closer attention, a constellation of small sensations, each one arising and disappearing, the whole structure held together by the mind's habit of calling it shoulder. The feelings are the same, not the complex emotional stories the mind tells, but the raw, affective tone of each moment, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. A taste is pleasant. An ache is unpleasant. Most moments are neither, and those are the ones the mind skips over in its rush to find something interesting. But the river of feeling is always flowing. Pleasant shifts to unpleasant in the time it takes a comfortable position to become uncomfortable. Unpleasant shifts to pleasant when the pressure is released. The whole river of feeling is in constant motion, and the weaver's experience in the loft is a small, vivid example of what happens when the mind tries to grip one of these currents and hold it still. The grip is what causes pain. This is one of the Buddha's clearest and most practical teachings. The hammering itself was neutral. It was sound, vibration, the movement of air. The suffering came from the story wrapped around it. This should not be happening. This is unfair. This is ruining my practice. The story turned neutral sensation into personal injury, and the personal injury demanded resistance, and the resistance burned through the body like a rope, sliding through closed hands. When the weaver finally let go of the rope, the sensation remained, but the burning stopped. The hammering continued, but the suffering ended, because there was no longer a self gripping the experience and demanding it be otherwise. In a province further south, in the same era, there lived an old grandmother who wept every day. Her neighbors knew her well and worried about her, but no one could find the cause of her sorrow, because it seemed to have no single source. It changed with the weather. On bright, sunny mornings, when the sky was clear and the lanes were dry, the grandmother sat on her doorstep and wept. Her elder daughter had married an umbrella maker, and on clear days, with no rain in sight, no one bought umbrellas. She imagined the unsold stock piling up in her daughter's shop, the worried conversations between her daughter and her son-in-law, the slow erosion of their livelihood under a cloudless sky. And she wept for them. On grey, rainy mornings, when the clouds hung low and the puddles spread across the market square, the grandmother sat on her doorstep and wept again. Her younger daughter had married a dyer of cloth, and on rainy days, the long bolts of dyed silk could not be hung outdoors to dry. She imagined the damp fabric losing its color, the frustrated customers, the income that slipped away with every hour of rain. And she wept for them. The neighbors came to call her the weeping grandmother. There was tenderness in the name, but also helplessness. Nothing could console her, because every sky confirmed one of her sorrows. Sun or rain, the world offered her proof that her daughters were suffering. One evening in the rainy season, a traveling monk took shelter beneath the overhang of her gate. The rain was heavy and steady, and he was in no hurry. He heard the weeping from inside and asked a neighbor what troubled the old woman. The neighbor explained the two daughters, the two trades, the two weathers. The monk waited until the rain eased, then knocked on the grandmother's door. She opened it with wet eyes. "I have heard about your daughters," he said. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "On a rainy day like this one, whose shop is full of customers?" The grandmother paused. "My elder daughters," she said slowly. "Everyone needs an umbrella in the rain. And on a sunny day, whose cloth dries beautifully on the line, the colors bright and fast. My younger daughters." Then on rainy days, the monk said, "You might think of the umbrellas going out the door. And on sunny days you might think of the silk blazing on the lines." The grandmother looked at him. The rain dripped from the overhang between them. Something in her face shifted, the smallest movement, like the first crack in a long frost. She tried it the next morning. The sun rose clear and hot, and she sat on her doorstep and thought, tentatively, of her younger daughter's cloth, spread out in bright rows, the reds and blues and greens deepening in the warmth. The image was true. It had always been true. She had simply never looked at it. The following day brought rain, and she thought of her elder daughter's shop, busy with customers shaking the water from their coats, grateful for a good umbrella. That image too was true. It had always been true. Within a season, the neighbors noticed the change. The weeping had stopped. The grandmother sat on her doorstep with a different expression, still watching the sky, still thinking of her daughters, but seeing something she had missed before. The weather had not changed. Her daughter's trades had not changed. Nothing in the world had moved 1 inch from where it had always been. But the picture the grandmother's mind laid over the world had turned, like a coin flipped in the hand, and the same facts that had produced tears now produced something close to ease. The neighbors, bemused, began to call her the laughing grandmother. The Buddha described the third and fourth rivers as the river of perceptions and the river of thoughts. Perceptions are the labels the mind places on raw experience: rain, sun, good day, bad day, my daughter is suffering. They feel like facts, but they are constructions, assembled from habit and expectation and the particular angle from which the mind happens to be looking. The grandmother's perceptions were accurate in one sense. It was true that rain hurt the dyer and sun hurt the umbrella maker. But they were incomplete because they selected only the loss and ignored the gain, and they called that selection reality. Thoughts build on perceptions the way a house builds on a foundation. Once the perception says bad day, the thoughts construct an entire edifice of worry and prediction and sorrow on top of it, and the whole structure feels so solid that questioning it seems absurd. Of course this is a bad day. Look at the rain. But the monk's single question, whose shop is full of customers, pulled one brick from the foundation, and the entire structure shifted. The fifth river, the Buddha taught, is consciousness itself, the knowing faculty, the awareness that receives all the other rivers. This river, too, is in motion. It shifts from hearing to seeing to thinking to feeling, moment by moment, following whatever appears. And even this river is selfless. There is knowing, but there is no knower standing behind it in a control room. There is experiencing, but no fixed experiencer who owns the experiences. The whole thing is flowing, all 5 rivers together, braided and moving and alive, and the invitation of the teaching is simply to let them flow. The grip is what causes pain. The more tightly you hold a moving river, the more the rope burns through your hands. And the release is not a loss. It is the end of the burning. The water continues to flow. The sensations and feelings and perceptions and thoughts continue to arise and pass, but without the grip, there is ease. And the ease is not something added. It is what was always here, underneath the holding. There is a kindness in impermanence that is easy to miss. Everything difficult is also passing. The mood that seems permanent tonight will not be here next week. The thought that feels like the truth will dissolve by morning. The ache in the body will shift and change and eventually release. Nothing stays, and that means nothing terrible stays either. The river carries everything, and everything it carries eventually moves beyond the bend and out of sight. Right now, the body is a river. There are sensations flowing through it, temperature and pressure and the subtle weight of rest. They are not permanent. They are moving even now, shifting so slowly they might seem still, but they are not still. They are the first river, doing what it has always done. There are feelings present too, a general tone of the moment, pleasant or neutral or somewhere in between. That tone is the second river, and it will change without being asked. There may be perceptions, images or impressions and thoughts, fragments of the day or anticipations of tomorrow. These are the third and fourth rivers, passing through like leaves on water. And there is the knowing of all of it, the awareness in which the rivers are flowing. That is the fifth river, and it is as close to who you are as anything the night can offer. There is a kindness built into this flowing that is easy to overlook. Because nothing stays, nothing terrible stays either. The difficult feeling that seems permanent tonight will shift by morning. The thought that feels like the final truth will be replaced by another thought before the hour is out. The ache will change its shape. The worry will lose its edge. The river carries everything forward, and forward means through, and through means that whatever is hard right now is also on its way somewhere else. Impermanence is not only the loss of what is good, it is also the passing of what is painful. And in that passing, there is a mercy that asks for nothing in return. There is nothing to do with any of this except to let it flow. To rest on the bank and watch the water move. To let the leaves pass without reaching in to grab them. To be here, breathing, aware, unhurried, as the river of this life carries what it carries and moves on. Whenever you are ready, the journey continues from here. The Buddha is recorded as saying, in one of the most direct promises in the Pali Canon, "If it were not possible for you to awaken, I would not teach you these practices. But because it is possible, because it is your very nature, I offer them, so that you too may join in this awakening." That promise contains an assumption so radical it is easy to read past it. It says awakening is not a distant achievement for extraordinary people. It is the natural capacity of every person. It says the Buddha does not teach because a few special students might make it, but because all of them already carry what is needed, and the teaching is simply the reminder. This is the territory where tonight's exploration arrives at something the heart needs as much as the mind. The previous teachings have mapped the landscape of identity, the original innocence beneath the layers, the awareness that does not age, the one who knows, the costumes that can be set down, the rivers that flow without needing to be held. All of this is true and all of it matters. But there is a feeling that often lives beneath the intellectual understanding, a feeling that says, perhaps this is all true, but perhaps it is true for everyone except me. Perhaps my particular flaws, my particular history, my particular failures make me the exception. That feeling has a name in the Buddhist tradition. It is called the identification with unworthiness. And it is, of all the costumes, the one most difficult to remove, because it does not feel like a costume. It feels like the truth. In a mountain monastery, high above the cloud line, a nun had practiced for many years. She had come to the monastery as a young woman, full of doubt and longing, and she had given herself to the practice with a sincerity that was visible to everyone around her. She sat with patience through long winters. She studied the teachings and lived them as fully as she could. She served the other nuns and the villagers who came to the temple for guidance. And slowly, over the years, the old abbot had come to rely on her understanding. When visitors had difficult questions, he often sent them to her. When younger nuns struggled with their practice, he suggested they speak with her. One spring morning, the abbot called her to his room. The plum blossoms were just beginning to open outside the window, and the air smelled of cold earth and warming stone. "It is time," he said simply. "You are ready to teach." She looked at him as though he had spoken in a language she did not understand. "I am not ready," she said. "Why not?" "My practice is unfinished. There are days when my mind is scattered, days when I sit and feel nothing but restlessness. I have not overcome my impatience. I still feel doubt. I still feel fear." She paused, and her voice dropped. How could I carry something so beautiful with hands as imperfect as mine? The abbot did not argue. He did not list her accomplishments or remind her of the students she had already helped. He stood up from his cushion and crossed the small room to where she sat. Then he did something he had never done before. He reached down and took both of her hands in his own, and he looked at her. It was a long look, unhurried, complete, the kind of looking that does not search for anything because it is not interested in finding faults or measuring progress. It was the kind of looking that simply receives what is there, the way the sky receives the mountain without asking the mountain to be taller or more symmetrical. He looked at her hands, rough from years of work. He looked at her face, lined by seasons of cold mornings and long sittings. He looked at her eyes, which were filling with tears she could not explain. "I have looked carefully," he said at last, his voice so ordinary it almost disappeared into the morning air. "And I find nothing missing." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words did not come. Something in the looking itself had answered her objection before she could voice it. He had not looked at her the way a teacher evaluates a student. He had looked at her the way the tradition itself looks at every being, as already complete, already whole, already containing everything that matters. And under that gaze, the voice of unworthiness, which had been speaking inside her for as long as she could remember, went strangely silent. She walked back across the courtyard in the early light. The plum blossoms were pale against the dark branches. The stones under her feet were the same stones she had walked across 1,000 times. But the internal landscape had shifted. The old argument, the one that said she was not enough, that she had further to go, that her flaws disqualified her from the beauty of the teaching, had lost its footing. It had been met, fully and directly, by a gaze that saw everything and found nothing lacking, and it simply could not stand in the face of that. The Buddhist tradition has a phrase for what the abbot offered, the glance of mercy. It refers to the experience of being looked at with so much love that the things you have denied about yourself, the goodness you could not claim, the beauty you could not own, become suddenly visible. The glance of mercy does not add anything. It does not bestow a quality that was absent. It simply sees what is already there, clearly and completely, and in the seeing, the one being seen is changed. This is the function of the phrase, "O nobly born," that has moved through this evening. It does not say you must earn your nobility. It says you were born with it. It does not say practice will make you worthy. It says worthiness was the starting condition. And the most important thing the tradition can do, again and again, is to remind you of that, because the habit of forgetting is strong, and the voice of unworthiness is practiced and persuasive and very, very loyal. That loyalty is itself a clue. People do not fight to hold on to beliefs that are obviously false. They fight for the ones that feel true. And unworthiness feels true because it has been confirmed so many times, by criticism, by failure, by the inevitable gap between what a person hopes to be and what they manage on any ordinary afternoon. Each confirmation adds another thread to the fabric, until the garment of "I am not enough" is so familiar it feels like skin. Taking it off seems impossible because it seems like there would be nothing underneath. But there is something underneath. The nun felt it when the abbot's gaze met hers. The prince in the first story felt it when the minister spoke his mother's name. The traveler felt it when the jewel was found in the lining of his coat. In each case, what was underneath the story of insufficiency was the same thing, a completeness so native and so close that it had been invisible, the way the eye cannot see itself. In a small village temple, the kind where farmers and fishermen came to light incense and sit in the cool shade, there stood a row of figures along the back wall of the hall. Most of them were new. They had been carved and gilded that same year, bright and gleaming, and they stood in their niches with the proud bearing of things that know they are admired. Their gold leaf caught the lamplight. Their faces were smooth and perfectly symmetrical. The villagers bowed to them and placed flowers at their feet. In the corner farthest from the door, half hidden behind a pillar, sat a small clay figure. He had no gilding. He had no carved features to speak of, just a simple face pressed into the clay with a thumb and a round body that might have been shaped by a child. He had been in the temple longer than anyone could remember, but no one paid him much attention. The gilded figures looked down at him from their niches with a polite indifference that the clay figure understood perfectly. He was not beautiful. He was not impressive. He was just a lump of earth, and he knew it. The oldest presence in the temple was not one of the gilded figures. It was a wooden bodhisattva who stood near the entrance, so worn by centuries of touching that his features had been almost entirely smoothed away. His nose had been rubbed down by 1,000 palms. His hands were rounded nubs. His robes, once carved in flowing detail, were now soft ridges like the folds of old cloth. He had been in the temple since it was built, and over the centuries, every person who entered had touched him on the way in, brushing a hand across his surface as a kind of greeting until the wood had taken on the sheen of polished stone. One evening, when the hall was empty and the lamp was low, the clay figure asked the Bodhisattva a question. What does it mean to be real? The wooden figure was silent for a while. Then he spoke in a voice like the creak of old timber. It is not about how you are made, he said. It is something that happens to you. When someone loves you for a long time, with their hands and their breath and their heart, then you become real. Does it hurt? Sometimes. When you are real, you do not mind. Does it happen quickly? It takes a long time. That is why it does not happen to things that break easily, or to things that need to be kept behind glass. By the time it happens, your surface may be worn away. Your paint may be gone. Your edges may be soft. But none of that matters, because once you are real, you cannot be made less real again. It lasts. The clay figure looked at the Bodhisattva's worn surface, at the place where his nose had been, at the smooth hollows where thousands of hands had pressed, and he understood. The Bodhisattva was the most real thing in the temple. His beauty was not in his shape. It was in the evidence of love that had passed over him, day after day, century after century, wearing him down to what he truly was. Some time later, a young girl from the village began visiting the temple on her own. She was shy, and she did not go to the gilded figures. She went to the corner, to the small clay figure half hidden behind the pillar. She sat cross-legged on the stone floor and talked to him in a low voice, telling him about her day, her worries, her small joys. She brought him wildflowers and set them carefully at his base. She carried him out to the garden when the weather was warm and set him on the wall beside her while she played. Over the months, his surface changed. The places where her hands held him grew smooth. His edges softened. A fine crack appeared along one side where she had gripped too hard on a slippery morning, and she had cried over it and then carried him more carefully afterward. His face, which had been rough clay, began to take on a certain warmth, a character that had not been there before, the kind of beauty that comes from use and from being needed. One evening, the girl brought her grandmother to the temple. The old woman looked at the gilded figures, then at the small clay figure in the girl's hands. "He isn't just clay," the girl said, holding him up so her grandmother could see. "He's real." And the grandmother, who had lived long enough to know what love looks like when it has been working on something for a while, looked at the small figure's worn, warm surface and did not disagree. The teaching in this story is the same teaching the abbot gave the nun, carried in a different key. Realness, in the Buddhist sense, is not a matter of accomplishment or appearance. It is a matter of being met by love over time and being changed by the meeting. The gilded figures were beautiful by anyone's measure, but their beauty was untouched. No one had held them. No one had wept over their cracks. No one had whispered their small truths to them in the late afternoon. They were admired, but they were not real, because realness requires the willingness to be worn down, to lose the polished surface, to stand in the corner without guilt and be found anyway. Unworthiness often comes from comparing ourselves to the gilded figures. They look so complete, so unblemished, so obviously worthy. But the teaching, the one the Bodhisattva and the abbot and the Buddha all point toward, says that the worn surface is the sign of something precious. The cracks are where the love got in. The missing paint is where the hands kept returning. And the one who has been loved past their defenses, loved past their self-image, loved past their own objections, is more real than any gilded image, because they have been changed by something larger than themselves. The practice of turning this kind of attention inward is one of the most radical things the Buddhist path offers. To look at yourself the way the abbot looked at the nun. To receive your own life, your own imperfect and worn and cracked life, with the same gaze that the Bodhisattva received from 1,000 passing hands. To see what is there, fully and without flinching, and to find not the list of failures you expected, but something whole, something real, something that was never missing. Right now, in whatever posture the body has come to rest in, there is an opportunity to do something very simple. You can turn the attention inward, toward yourself, and look with the same warmth you would offer a close friend who confessed they felt unworthy. You can look without judgment, without the habit of measuring or correcting. Just looking, just seeing what is here. The cracks are here, yes. The imperfections are here. The history of all the times you fell short of what you hoped. But underneath all of that, the same wholeness the nun found when the abbot took her hands and looked. The same realness the clay figure discovered when the girl kept coming back. The same dignity the tradition addresses when it says, "O nobly born, you have been worn by life, and the wearing has made you more real, not less. The places where you have been loved are smooth. The places where you have struggled have character. And the whole of you, held in this kind of attention, is not the collection of faults you have been cataloguing for years. It is something complete, something that was always here, underneath the argument about whether it was good enough. Let the breath carry that warmth for a few moments. Let the gaze soften. Let the old story of insufficiency rest, if only for this breath, and see what is here when it does. There is no rush. The evening holds space for all of this, and the path continues, gently, from here. The Buddhist path does not promise a life without sorrow. It promises something more honest than that. It promises that sorrow can be met, fully and without flinching, by an awareness large enough to hold it. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki once said that life is like stepping into a boat that is about to sail out to sea and sink. Everything we love will change. Everything we hold will pass through our hands. And the path does not ask us to pretend otherwise. It asks us to open our hands anyway. Until now, this evening has moved through the territory of identity, who you are, beneath the layers, beneath the costumes, beneath the rivers of experience. That exploration has been spacious and, at times, liberating. But liberation that skips over the hard places is not liberation. It is avoidance. And avoidance has a way of returning what was skipped, heavier than before. So the evening turns now toward the tender ground, toward sorrow and loneliness and pain, toward the parts of life that do not feel like freedom and do not look like wisdom, toward the places where the question, "Who am I?" is not philosophical at all, but raw and immediate and aching. The teaching here is simple. Those places are sacred, and the one who turns toward them with an open heart is not weaker for it. They are standing on holy ground. In a village high in the mountains, in the shadow of an ancient temple, a woman lost her husband in the early autumn. He had been well, and then he was not, and then he was gone, and the swiftness of it left her standing in her doorway with the strange feeling that the world had continued moving while something inside her had stopped. She expected the village to step back. Grief, in her experience, was something people looked away from, a heaviness others preferred not to carry. She expected sympathetic nods and then distance. She expected to grieve alone, but the village did something different. The temple's old abbess came to her house on the second day. She was a small woman with deep-set eyes and a voice that sounded like it had been worn smooth by decades of chanting. She sat beside the widow on the wooden step and said nothing for a long while. The morning moved around them. A rooster called from a neighbor's yard. The smell of wood smoke drifted from the houses below. The silence between them was not awkward. It had the quality of a held hand, present, without needing to explain itself. Then the abbess spoke. "In this valley, we do not turn away from those who grieve," she said. "A person who has been struck by loss stands at a threshold. She is closer to the sacred than the rest of us. The heart that has been broken open has no walls, and the prayers that come through a heart with no walls are the strongest prayers in the valley." The widow looked at her. "My prayers feel like nothing," she said. "They feel empty." "That is because the emptiness is doing the praying," the abbess said. "And emptiness is what the sacred is made of." The widow did not fully understand, but the abbess's presence and the fact that she had come at all, and the way she sat without fidgeting or filling the air with advice, planted something in the widow that would take months to flower. In the days that followed, a slow procession began. Neighbors came to the widow's house. They brought food, as neighbors do, but they also brought something else. They brought their own sorrows. A young mother, whose child had been ill for weeks, sat with the widow one afternoon, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red with sleeplessness. She hesitated for a long time before speaking. "The abbess says your prayers are stronger than mine right now," she said. Would you pray for my daughter?" The widow looked at her. A month ago she would have said, "I can barely pray for myself." But something had shifted. The emptiness the abbess had described was not a void. It was a space, and into that space the young mother's sorrow poured as naturally as water, finding a channel. "Yes," the widow said, "I will." In. An elderly farmer who had lost his fields to a landslide came and asked for the same. A boy who had quarreled with his father and could not find the words to mend it asked if she would hold his difficulty in her prayers. The widow did not understand why they came to her, of all people. She was the one with the least. She was the one who had been emptied. But the abbess had said something that stayed with her. The heart with no walls has nothing between itself and what it prays for. And so she prayed, and the praying was different from anything she had done before. It moved through her like water through sand, unobstructed, arriving at its destination without detour. She kept a small altar lamp for her husband in the corner of the main room. Each evening, she lit it and sat beside it, and the flame became a kind of companionship, a small warmth in the place where the larger warmth had been. Visitors came and sat beside the lamp with her, and the room filled, over the months, with a presence that was difficult to name, but easy to feel. The sorrow did not leave, but it changed. It deepened into something that had weight and dignity, the way a river deepens as it slows. When the year turned and the temple held its ceremony of release, the widow carried the lamp to the riverbank at dawn. The abbess said the words, and the widow set the lamp on the water and watched it float downstream, its small flame reflected in the current, growing smaller and smaller until it rounded the bend and was gone. She stood there afterward and felt the emptiness, which was different now from the emptiness of a year ago. A year ago it had been a wound. Now it was a well. People came to it and drew from it, and it did not run dry. The grief had become a kind of depth in her that others recognized without being told, and they came to her the way they would come to a spring in the hillside, knowing that what they found there was clean and true, and had been filtered through a long darkness. The Lakota people of the North American plains carry a teaching that runs parallel to what the abbess offered. In the Lakota tradition, a person who is grieving is considered the most holy, the most sacred. The word is wakan. The belief is that one who has been struck by loss stands at the threshold of the spirit world, and that the prayers of such a person are the most powerful prayers anyone can offer. Other people come to the grieving and ask, humbly, "Will you also pray for me?" This is the opposite of how most modern cultures treat grief. Most cultures treat it as a problem to be solved, an illness to be cured, a state to be moved through as quickly as possible so that normal life can resume. The Lakota teaching and the Buddhist path that parallels it say something radically different. They say that grief is not an obstacle to the sacred. It is a doorway. The one who has lost everything has nothing between herself and the truth, and that nothing is precisely what makes her prayers so strong. The Persian poet Hafiz gave this counsel to those who ache: "Do not be so quick to hand your loneliness away. Stay with it. Let it work on you," he said, "and let it season the heart in ways almost nothing else can." This is a poet's way of saying what the abbess said and what the Lakota tradition teaches, that sorrow is not something to escape from. It is something to be seasoned by. The loneliness that seems unbearable is also an ingredient in a depth that cannot be achieved any other way. The person who has been through it and who has stayed present through it rather than running carries something the world needs. The Buddhist approach to pain follows the same principle. It does not say, "Fix the pain." It does not say, "Explain the pain," or "Justify the pain," or "Find the lesson in the pain." It says, "Hold the pain in awareness, the way you would hold a child who is crying, with tenderness, with patience, without an agenda." The awareness does not need the pain to go away. It is large enough to contain it. And when pain is held that way, something shifts. The pain itself may not change, but the relationship to it changes entirely, and the change in relationship is the difference between suffering and freedom. The Sufi saint Rabia of Basra, who lived in the 8th century, understood this with a clarity that still arrests the heart. Rabia had been ill for some time. She lived simply in a bare room with a clay water jug and a prayer mat and nothing else, and her body had grown thin and weak. The light through the window fell across her mat in the late afternoon, and the shadows of the room were long and soft. 2 old friends came to visit her. They had known her for many years and loved her deeply, and when they saw the state she was in, they could not speak for some time. They sat beside her mat and looked at the floor. One of them pressed his palms together. The other folded his hands in his lap and breathed slowly, trying to steady himself. At last, one of them found his voice. "Rabia," he said, "if you would pray, your pain would be eased. Ask the Most High to lift this from you." Rabia turned her head toward him slowly. "Tell me," she said, "who has sent me this pain?" He shifted uncomfortably. "The Most High," he said. "Then how can I ask, with one breath, to be spared what the Beloved has given with another?" The room fell silent. The friend opened his mouth and closed it again. There was no argument to make against a love that complete. The pain was real. The weakness was real. And Rabia's acceptance of it was not resignation. It was something fiercer and more alive than resignation. It was a love so thorough that it included everything, the beauty and the pain together, held as a single offering. After a while, the conversation softened. The harshness of illness receded a little, and the three of them sat together in a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Rabia told her friends, with the trace of a smile, that for 12 years she had wanted fresh dates. Dates were common in the markets of the city, inexpensive, easy to find, the kind of thing a person could buy without thinking. But she had never bought them. Because a lover, she said, wants only what the Beloved wants. And if the Beloved had not placed dates in her hand, then she would not reach for them. The wanting was there. She did not deny it. But she held it inside something larger than the wanting, and the larger thing held her, too, and the whole arrangement had a sweetness to it that the dates themselves could never have matched. Her friends looked at each other. They had come to comfort a sick woman. They were leaving comforted themselves, having watched a person hold pain inside a love so vast that the pain could rest there like a stone resting in a river, present and accounted for, carried by something larger than itself, and at peace. The teaching that moves through both of these stories is the Buddhist principle of turning toward. The mind's first instinct, when pain arrives, is to run, to distract, to explain, to fix, to medicate, to blame, to do anything at all except sit still with what hurts. And each of these responses has its place. But the contemplative path adds something the others leave out, the possibility that the pain itself, held without resistance in an awareness that does not need it to change, can transform into something the heart is deepened by, rather than diminished by. The instinct to bypass pain is strong, and it comes from a good place. No one wants to suffer, and the desire to feel better is natural and healthy. But bypassing has a cost. What is pushed away does not dissolve. It goes underground, and it returns, often wearing heavier clothes than before. The sadness that was suppressed becomes a numbness that spreads. The anger that was denied becomes a tension that lives in the body for years. The grief that was rushed through becomes a hollowness that no amount of busyness can fill. The tradition says, instead of pushing, hold. Instead of running, sit. Instead of explaining the pain, receive it, the way the earth receives rain, without argument, without strategy, without needing it to stop. This is loving awareness meeting difficulty. It is the same awareness that noticed the aging face in the mirror, the same awareness that watched the rivers flow, the same awareness that held the clay figure as it was worn smooth by love. It does not change its nature when the content changes. It is as open in sorrow as it was in peace. And that openness, offered to pain, is what the tradition means by fearless tenderness, the willingness to be present with what hurts, without armor, without strategy, with only the vast and patient attention that has been here all along. There is a courage in this that is easy to underestimate. Turning toward pain feels like weakness to a culture that prizes strength and efficiency. But the widow who sat with her altar lamp for a year, the saint who refused to pray away her suffering, the mothers and farmers who came to the grieving woman for prayers, all of them understood something the culture of speed misses, that tenderness and courage are the same movement. The heart that opens to pain is not a weak heart. It is a heart that has learned to hold more than the mind thought possible. And what it holds, it transforms, slowly and without fanfare, into the kind of depth that others recognize without being told, and come to, and drink from. Right now, there may be a small discomfort present, a tension in the body, a heaviness in the chest, a thought that carries a dull ache. It does not need to be a large pain. Even the smallest one will serve. If you like, let the attention move toward it rather than away. Let it approach the discomfort as the neighbors approach the widow's house, without any plan to fix or explain or remove it, coming only to sit beside it and offer presence. To hold it, as Rabia held her pain, inside something larger than the pain itself. There is no requirement to feel anything in particular, only to notice what happens when the usual resistance softens, even slightly, and the discomfort is allowed to be here without being fought. The warmth of that attention is itself a kind of prayer, the kind the abbess spoke of, the kind that moves through a heart with no walls. Let it rest. Let it all rest. When the heart has had its moment here, we will walk on together. There is a pattern so common it is almost invisible, the habit of postponing peace. When this situation resolves, then I will rest. When the pain subsides, then I will be at ease. When the circumstances of my life improve, then I will be free. The mind places peace on the far side of a condition, and the condition, because it belongs to the world of change, either never arrives or arrives and is immediately replaced by the next one. And so peace is deferred, again and again, into a future that keeps receding. The Buddha addressed this pattern directly. He taught that clinging is the mechanism of suffering, not the pain itself, but the grip around it, the refusal to let experience be what it is. And he taught that the release of clinging does not require the pain to stop. It does not require the situation to improve. It does not require anything at all, except a willingness to open the hand. This is one of the most radical claims in the tradition, that peace is available in any condition, including conditions that are very difficult, including conditions that will not get better. It does not depend on getting what you want. It depends on releasing the demand that life be other than it is. In the time of the Buddha, there lived a man whose generosity had become legendary. He was a householder, a layperson, and he had used his wealth to feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, and build one of the great monastery groves where the Buddha and his community could live and teach. He was beloved by everyone who knew him. And now he was dying. His illness had come on gradually, then all at once. The pain was severe and growing worse. He lay on his bed and could feel the body failing, and the body's failure was not gradual or dignified. It was heavy and grinding, as if great winds were pressing through him without ceasing. The Buddha, learning of his condition, sent his wisest disciple, Sariputta, to sit with him. Sariputta arrived with a younger monk as his companion and found the dying man in great distress. "How is it going, old friend?" Sariputta asked, sitting beside him. "It is not good," the man said. His voice was strained but clear. "The pain is increasing. It does not subside. It feels as if my head is being squeezed by a band that tightens and never releases. I am not getting well." Sariputta listened in silence for a long time. Then he offered a training unlike anything the man had heard before in all his years of devotion. "Then, householder," Sariputta said, "train yourself in this way. Say to yourself, 'I will not cling to the eye and what is seen. I will not cling to the ear and what is heard. I will not cling to the nose and what is smelled, to the tongue and what is tasted, to the body and what is touched, to the mind and what is thought. I will not cling to this world or any world beyond it. I will not be dependent on the changing conditions. Train yourself in this way." The room was still. The younger monk watched the dying man's face as he began to do what Sariputta had asked. It was not a visible thing. There was no dramatic shift. But something in the man's bearing changed, slowly, like a hand that has been clenching for hours beginning to open. The grip on each sense, each thought, each expectation, each hope and each fear loosened by a fraction, and in that fraction, something that had been trapped began to breathe. Tears came to the man's eyes. The younger monk leaned forward. "Are you sinking, householder? Are you foundering?" "No," the man said, and his voice was steadier now. "I am not sinking. I am not foundering. But in all my years of devotion, in all my years of listening to the teachings, I have never heard anything this deep. This is what I needed. This is what was missing." There was a pause. Sariputta said, carefully, that this particular teaching was usually given only to those who had renounced the world, to monks and nuns who had left everything behind. The dying man's response was immediate and clear. "Then please," he said, "ask the Blessed One to change that. Give this teaching to everyone. There are people, lay people, ordinary people, who are wasting away for not hearing it. They are suffering because no one has told them that the hand can open. Tell them. There will be those who understand." Those were among his last requests. And the tradition honored them. The teaching was open to all. What the dying man discovered in those final hours is the central mechanism of Buddhist liberation. Clinging is not a philosophical concept. It is a physical act that happens many times a day, and it follows a sequence so regular, the Buddha mapped it out, like a physician mapping the stages of a fever. First there is contact. The eye meets a sight, the ear meets a sound, the mind meets a thought. Then there is feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Then there is craving, the reach for more of what is pleasant, the push against what is unpleasant. Then there is clinging, the full grip, the hand closing on the rope, the mind saying mine, or must have, or cannot bear. And then there is suffering, the burning of the grip as the rope moves. The whole sequence can happen in a fraction of a second. The eye sees something beautiful, and before the seeing is even complete, the mind has reached for it, claimed it, and begun to worry about losing it. The ear hears something harsh, and before the echo fades, the mind has pushed back against it, built a story about it, and generated a knot of tension in the shoulders. Each cycle is small, but the cycles run continuously, all day, every day, and the accumulated burning is what the Buddha called dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness that runs beneath ordinary life like a low hum beneath music. Most people live their entire lives inside that hum without ever hearing it clearly, because it has never once stopped long enough to be noticed by its absence. The dying man was clinging to the expectation that his body should be getting better. He was clinging to the hope that the pain should subside. He was clinging to the idea that death should not be happening. And each of these was a closed hand around something that would not stop moving. When Sariputta taught him to release, one sense at a time, one expectation at a time, the movement did not stop. The pain did not stop. The body did not improve. But the burning stopped because the hands were open. This is different from not caring. The man loved his life. He loved the people in it. He loved the grove he had built and the teacher he had served. Releasing the grip did not mean abandoning that love. It meant setting the love free from the demand that things stay as they are. And love, freed from that demand, can hold anything. It can hold illness. It can hold loss. It can hold the full weight of a human life ending without crumbling, because it is no longer trying to prevent what is happening. It is simply present, open, alive. The open hand can still touch. It can still reach out and hold another hand. It can still give and receive. It simply does not close, and because it does not close, it does not burn. His plea that this teaching be given to everyone carries its own teaching. He had spent a lifetime in the Buddha's community and had never heard this. The deepest instruction on non-clinging had been reserved for specialists, for renunciants, for those who had given up the world. And the dying man, with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose, said, "That is wrong. This belongs to everyone. The mother at home, the merchant in the market, the farmer in the field, all of them grip the rope, all of them burn, and all of them could learn to open their hands." Peace, in other words, is not a specialist's achievement. It is everyone's inheritance. In the ancient world, across a different tradition but arriving at the same door, a boy born into servitude in a great household heard something through the courtyard wall that changed the entire course of his life. A wandering monk had been invited to teach the family. The household gathered in the shade of the main hall, and the boy, who was not permitted to enter, pressed his ear against the mud brick wall and listened. The monk's voice was calm and measured, and the teaching was simple. Some things can be bound, but the mind's assent cannot be forced. A person can be told what to do, but no one can make that person believe, inwardly, that the doing is right. The inner agreement is free. It always has been, and no external power can reach it. The boy did not understand every word, but the central idea lodged in him like a seed in dark soil, and over the years, it grew. As a young servant, he tested the teaching against his daily life. He carried water and swept floors and did what he was told. But he began to notice something. No matter what task was placed before him, no matter what command was given, there was a place inside him that the commands could not reach. His hands could be directed. His feet could be sent on errands. But the knowing, the inner assent or refusal, the decision about what was true and what was false, that remained entirely his. No one had given it to him. No one could take it away. He held it the way a person holds a flame cupped in their palms on a windy night, carefully, privately, with the understanding that this small light was the one thing that could not be confiscated. When his freedom came, Years later, he chose a bare hut at the edge of a village. He owned almost nothing: a clay lamp, a sleeping mat, a wooden bowl. People from the surrounding villages began to come to him, drawn by a reputation that traveled the way reputations do in small places, through a farmer who mentioned it to a merchant, who told a cousin, who told a friend. They came because the old man spoke about freedom with the authority of someone who had tasted its absence, and because the stillness around him was unmistakable. It was not the stillness of someone who had withdrawn from the world. It was the stillness of someone who had found something inside the world that the world could not disturb. He was offered finer things by students who came to hear him teach, and he declined them all, with a warmth that kept the refusal from feeling like a rebuke. "A man with a great house spends his evenings worrying about its roof," he said once. "A man with a clay lamp spends his evenings watching the flame. I prefer the flame." Years passed. His hair turned white. His body grew thin and slow. But the clarity in his eyes did not dim, and the visitors kept coming. And eventually a proud man arrived, a man of obvious means, whose fine clothes and direct manner marked him as someone accustomed to being listened to. He looked at the hut, at the single lamp, at the plank bed, and said with undisguised contempt, "How can a man who owns nothing speak of freedom?" The old teacher looked at him with clear, untroubled eyes. "I have spent a lifetime watching," he said, "and I have watched men in fine houses who could not sleep for fear of losing them. I have watched men with great wealth who lived like prisoners inside their own abundance. I have yet to meet the chain that could bind a mind that has learned to be still." The visitor stood in the doorway of the hut. The evening light fell across the floor. The single lamp burned with the same steady flame the teacher had been watching for decades. And the visitor, for all his wealth, could not find the words to argue with the peace in the room. The stillness in the hut was its own argument. The Buddhist tradition and the Stoic tradition of the Western ancient world arrived at this same insight independently, separated by thousands of miles and very different languages, that freedom does not depend on circumstances. The body can be confined. The situation can be painful. The conditions can be as far from ideal as it is possible to imagine. And still, the inner life, the awareness, the knowing, the capacity to meet what is with an open and undivided attention remains untouched. No circumstance can imprison it. No condition can diminish it. It is, as Sariputta taught the dying man, not dependent on the changing conditions. This is what it means to say that peace depends on nothing. It does not mean that conditions do not matter. It does not mean that suffering should be tolerated or that injustice should be accepted. It means that the deepest peace, the one that holds a person together when everything else has been stripped away, is not located in the circumstances. It is located in the one who meets them. And that one, the one who knows, the awareness that has been present through every chapter of this evening, is free in every situation, because it was never bound in the first place. The lamp in the old teacher's hut is still burning. The flame does not depend on the size of the room. Right now, there may be something you are holding on to. A small tension, a lingering concern, a wish that something in your life were different from the way it is. The grip may be so habitual that you do not even notice it as a grip. It just feels like the way things are. If you like, let the attention find that grip. Not to force it open, but to notice it. To feel the contraction, the tightness, the small effort of holding. It might be in the jaw, or the shoulders, or the belly, or in a thought that has been circling all day without resolution. The grip is not a problem. It is simply a hand that has been closed for a while, and hands can open. And then, without needing the situation to change, without needing the concern to resolve, without needing anything at all, see what happens when the hand softens. Even slightly, even for one breath. The pain may still be there. The concern may still be there. But the relationship to it can change. The way the dying man's relationship to his body changed when Sariputta taught him to open his hands. The situation is still what it is, but the burning can stop whenever the hands let go, and the love remains. The open hand can still reach out. It simply does not close around what it touches, and in that openness, there is a peace that the world did not give and cannot take away. Let that be enough for now. The evening deepens, and it carries us onward. The Buddhist teaching on continuation says that nothing is ever truly lost. Forms change. Bodies return to the earth. But the love that moved between two people does not end when one of them is no longer visible. It continues in the living, in their hands and their voice and their way of seeing, as present as it ever was, only wearing a different face. The Zen master Dogen wrote that birth and death are the life of the Buddha. They are not problems to be solved. They are the movement of something larger than any single form, as a wave rises and returns to the ocean, without the ocean losing anything at all. And within that movement, the connections between beings do not break. They change shape, as water changes shape when it moves from river to cloud to rain, but the water itself is never gone. This is the territory of the evening's deepest tenderness. Everything that has come before has been preparing for this, the innocence that cannot be damaged, the awareness that does not age, the one who knows, the open hand that does not cling. All of it converges here, at the place where love meets loss and discovers that loss is not the final word. The Vietnamese Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh lost his mother when he was a young man. He was 21 years old, and they had been very close. In the year that followed her death, he carried a grief so heavy that it colored everything. The world looked dimmer. The practice felt empty. The loss sat in the center of his chest like a stone that would not dissolve. Then one night, in the highlands, he was sleeping in his hermitage, a small hut set behind a temple, halfway up a hillside covered with tea plants. And he dreamed of his mother. In the dream, she was sitting with him, the way she had sat with him hundreds of times before. She was young again, her hair flowing down around her shoulders, and she spoke to him as naturally as if she had never been gone. They talked about ordinary things, the kinds of things mothers and sons say to each other when there is nothing urgent and nothing at stake, just the easy warmth of being together. And in the dream, the year of grief simply fell away because she was here. She had always been here. He woke at 2 a.m. The hut was dark. The hillside was silent. And the feeling that had filled the dream, the absolute certainty that he had never lost his mother, did not fade. It stayed, as clear and as real as the wooden walls around him and the cool night air on his face. He opened the door and stepped outside. The entire hillside was bathed in moonlight. It lay across the rows of tea plants like silver cloth, and the leaves caught the light and held it, each one gleaming. He began to walk, slowly, between the rows. And as he walked, he felt something he had not felt since before her death. He felt her presence. The moonlight touched his skin, and it felt like her hand, soft and careful, the way she used to caress his face when he was small, full of a tenderness that expected nothing in return. Each step he took on the damp earth carried her, because this body, he realized, was not his alone. It was a continuation. His hands were made of her hands. His eyes looked out from a face she had given him. His voice carried tones of her voice, and his habit of noticing the beauty in small things was her habit of noticing, passed to him as a river passes its current forward without losing itself. They were walking together, his mother and he together, leaving footprints in the damp evening soil. The footprints were his, and they were hers, and there was no separation between the two. From that night forward, the idea that he had lost his mother no longer existed. It had been an idea, and like all ideas, it was a construction, a picture the mind had made out of the concept of death and the concept of separation. When the picture dissolved, what remained was the felt truth. She was alive in him. She had always been alive in him. And she would continue in him as long as he continued, and in those who came after, and in their children, and in theirs. All he had to do to find her was look at his own palm, feel the evening air on his face, or place his feet on the earth and walk. This is the Buddhist teaching of interbeing, a term Thich Nhat Hanh himself created to describe what the tradition has always known, that nothing exists by itself. A flower is made of rain and sunlight and soil and the labor of the person who planted it. A person is made of parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, of every meal they were ever fed, and every word they were ever spoken, and every hand that ever held them. To look at any single thing closely enough is to see the entire web of conditions that brought it into being, stretching back beyond memory and forward beyond sight. When someone we love is no longer with us in the form we knew, the form has changed. But the web has not broken. The love that passed between you did not evaporate when the form it moved through changed. It moved into you, and it lives there now, in how you hold a cup of tea, in how you stand at the window in the early morning, in how you speak to children, or touch the earth, or pause in the middle of a task to look at something beautiful. These are not memories. They are continuations. The beloved is not behind you, in the past. The beloved is in you, in the present, as alive as the breath you are taking right now. The concept the mind uses to create the feeling of loss is the concept of separation. She is there, and I am here, and the distance between us is absolute. But the monk walking among the tea plants in the moonlight discovered that the concept was wrong. There was no distance. His mother was the moonlight on his skin. She was in the hands that held his bowl, in the steps his feet made on the earth. The concept of separation had been laid over a reality that was entirely continuous, and the concept was the only thing producing the ache. When the concept dissolved, in the dream and in the walk that followed it, what remained was not absence. It was presence, everywhere, in everything. This does not erase grief. Grief has its own dignity, its own timing, its own season, and the tradition does not ask anyone to skip over it. But alongside the grief, once the concept of separation begins to thin, there is a presence that becomes available. It is the presence of the one you love, alive in you, doing what they always did, shaping your hands, coloring your vision, teaching you, through your own body, how to be in the world. And that presence once noticed, does not come and go. It is steady. It is here. It was here all along. The girl in the mountain village found this presence in a mirror, believing she saw her mother and discovering she saw herself, and the discovery did not break the promise. It deepened it. The promise was that her mother would meet her there, and the mother did, in the only way the tradition says the dead truly live, in the face and the heart and the gestures of the one they loved into being. Every morning she looked, the meeting happened again, and it will keep happening for as long as she carries what she was given. There is a Japanese folktale, very old, that carries this teaching in the smallest and most human of forms. In a mountain province, far from the capital, a man returned home from a long journey with a gift for his wife. She had never traveled beyond the valley, and the gift was unlike anything she had ever seen. A small, round disc of polished metal, smooth and bright, in which, when she looked, a woman looked back at her. She laughed with surprise and delight. "Who is this?" she said, turning the disc this way and that. "She is lovely." Her husband smiled. "It is called a mirror," he said. "The woman you see is yourself." She held it up again and watched the face in the metal smile when she smiled and frown when she frowned, and the wonder of it kept her looking for days. But eventually, the wonder faded, and she wrapped the mirror carefully in cloth and placed it among her most treasured possessions, too precious for ordinary use. Years passed. A daughter was born, and the daughter grew into a young woman who looked so much like her mother that visitors often paused and looked twice, as if the mother had somehow split herself in two. The mother loved the girl with an entire heart, and the girl loved her back with the same completeness. Then the mother's health began to fail. It was gradual, as these things often are, a weariness that deepened into something more. When she knew she would not recover, she called her daughter to her bedside. "I am going to give you something," she said. She unwrapped the mirror from its cloth and placed it in the girl's hands. "Whenever you long for me, look into this, and you will find me there." The mother passed a few days later, and the girl, carrying the mirror in its cloth wrapping, began the practice her mother had described. Each morning, before the house was awake, she unwrapped the mirror and held it in both hands. And there, looking back at her, was her mother's face. Young and beautiful, the way she remembered her from childhood, before the illness, before the weariness. Smiling when the girl smiled, softening when the girl was sad. Present, steady, faithful, meeting her every day as if she had never left. The girl spoke to the face in the mirror each morning and each evening. She told it about her day, the small frustrations of the household, the early plum blossoms she had noticed on the hillside, the kindness of a neighbor who had helped her carry water. And the face listened with the same attention her mother had always given, and the weight of the loss, though it never disappeared, became something she could carry, because she was not carrying it alone. In difficult moments, she would slip away to the room where she kept the mirror and unwrap it, and the face that met hers had a steadying effect that no amount of reasoning could match. It was simply the presence of her mother, calm and loving, asking nothing, offering everything. And the girl lived her life by that presence. She made decisions as if her mother were watching, chose kindness as if her mother were nodding, carried herself through hard seasons as if her mother's hand were resting on her shoulder. Years later, the girl's father noticed her practice. He watched her one evening, speaking softly to the mirror with tears on her face, and he came to sit beside her. "My daughter," he said gently, "do you know what it is you are looking at?" She looked at him with her mother's eyes. "I am looking at my mother," she said. "She promised she would meet me here." The father took the mirror from her and held it up so that they could both see the face reflected in it. The face that looked back was the girl's own face, and it was, feature for feature, the face of her mother. The same eyes, the same brow, the same way of looking at the world with calm attention and open warmth. "Your mother was right," the father said, his voice unsteady. "She is here. She has been here all along." The girl looked at her own face in the mirror, and for the first time she understood. The promise had been kept. Her mother did meet her there, every day, in the one place where the continuation was most visible, in her own face, which was her mother's face, which was the face of every woman in the long line behind them, each one living in the features and the gestures and the heart of the one who came next. The face in the mirror is not a metaphor. It is a literal truth. The features you carry were given to you by people who came before, and when those people are no longer here in the form you knew, they are here in the form you see every day in the glass. The way you hold your hands belongs to someone. The way you tilt your head when you listen belongs to someone. The things that bring tears to your eyes, the things that make you laugh without thinking, the instinct to be kind to a stranger or to pause at the sight of evening light on water, these belong to the long line of people who shaped you, and they are alive in you, as alive as anything the night can hold. This is continuation without metaphysics. It does not require belief in anything beyond the ordinary. It requires only the willingness to notice what is already here, that the people you love are woven into you so thoroughly that they cannot be separated from you, any more than a dye can be lifted back out of the cloth once it is taken. They are in every cell and every gesture and every way of looking at the world. And that presence, once noticed, is a comfort so deep and so steady that the sharp edge of loss begins, slowly, to soften into something you might call gratitude, or you might call love, or you might simply call the truth. Right now, if it feels right, you might let the attention rest on someone you love, someone who is here, or someone who has walked on. Let their face come to mind, or their voice, or the particular quality of their presence, the thing about them that no photograph could ever capture, the warmth, or the humor, or the steadiness that was simply who they were. And then notice how they live in you, in how you carry yourself, in the words you choose, in the kindness you offer without thinking about where you learned it, in the small habits that came from them, how you fold a blanket, how you stand at the sink, how you look at the sky at a certain hour and feel something stir that has no name. They are here, in you, as close as your own breath. The idea that you lost them was only an idea. The love that moved between you is still moving, still alive, still leaving footprints in the evening soil. Let that be here. Let it rest. Let it settle into the body like warmth settling into cold hands. The evening draws near its close, and there is one more place to go, the widest place of all. The widest question a human being can ask is not, "Who am I?" but "What am I part of?" The first question, the one this evening began with, peels away the layers and finds the awareness beneath them. The second question goes further. It asks what that awareness belongs to, what it is connected to, what it is an expression of. And the answer the Buddhist and Zen traditions give is the widest answer possible: everything. You are not separate from the world. You are something the world is doing. The Zen master Dogen taught that to study the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be awakened by all things. The forgetting he described is not amnesia. It is the dissolving of the boundary that made self seem like a walled-off territory. When the wall comes down, what was inside and what was outside turn out to have been the same thing all along. The way, the wave, and the ocean were never two. This is where the evening arrives at its final resting place. The gold beneath the clay. The one who knows. The open hand. The rivers flowing. The love that continues. All of it has been pointing here, to the moment when the widest identity reveals itself, and the smallness falls away, and what remains is trust. In the garden behind a forest hermitage, an old man lived alone. He had been a teacher once, in the great monasteries, but he had given up lecturing years ago and returned to the mountain where he had first begun his practice. A young novice was sent to study with him, and the hermit agreed, on the condition that the boy arrive ready to unlearn what the monasteries had taught him. The novice arrived full of knowledge. He had memorized the sutras. He could recite the precepts. He could debate the fine points of doctrine with a sharpness that impressed his peers. He bowed to the hermit and said, with genuine respect, "I have studied for 12 years. I am ready to learn whatever you have left to teach." The old man looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me, in all those 12 years, did they teach you the one thing by knowing which everything else is known?" The novice hesitated. He was not sure what the question meant. "Come," the hermit said, "let us walk." They walked to the foot of a great fig tree in the garden. The tree was enormous, its canopy wide enough to shade the entire clearing, its roots spreading in every direction like the arms of a sleeping giant. "Bring me a fruit from this tree," the hermit said. The novice reached up and picked a small, ripe fig. "Now open it." He split it open with his fingers. Inside were dozens of tiny seeds, each one no larger than a grain of sand. "Now take one of those seeds and split it." The novice pressed his thumbnail into one of the seeds. It cracked open, and inside there was nothing, just a fine dust, almost invisible. "What do you see?" the hermit asked. "Nothing," the novice said. "There is almost nothing there." "And yet," the hermit said, "from that nothing, this entire tree has grown. The trunk, the roots, the canopy, the fruit, the shade we are standing in, all of it came from a subtlety so fine you cannot see it with your eyes. That subtlety is the true nature of all things. It pervades everything. It is present in the tree, and in the fruit, and in the seed, and in the nothing inside the seed. And that, dear one, is what you are." The novice stood under the tree and felt the shade on his shoulders and the cool earth under his bare feet. "Please," he said, "tell me more." "So be it, my child," the hermit said. That evening, in the hut, with the last light fading over the garden and the fig tree's shadow stretching across the packed earth floor, the hermit placed a clay jar of water between them. "One more lesson," he said. "Drop a lump of salt into this jar." The novice picked up the small block of coarse salt from the shelf and dropped it into the water. It sank to the bottom with a soft click against the clay. "Now go to sleep. We will return to it in the morning." The novice lay on his mat and listened to the sounds of the mountain, the insects and the wind and the creak of bamboo. And he wondered what the salt had to do with the nothing inside the seed, and whether the hermit's teaching was building towards something or circling something, and then he slept. When he woke, the hermit was already sitting beside the jar. The early light fell across his hands, and the water in the jar caught the light and held it, clear and still. "Find the salt," the hermit said. The novice reached into the jar and felt through the water. There was nothing to find. The salt had dissolved completely. The water looked exactly as it had before. "It is gone," the novice said. "Taste the water from the top of the jar." The novice sipped. "Salty," he said. "Taste from the middle." "Salty." "From the bottom." "Salty." The hermit smiled. "The salt is there," he said, "but you cannot see it. You cannot hold it. You cannot separate it from the water. And yet it pervades the entire jar, top to bottom, without a single place where it is absent." He paused. The garden beyond the doorway was full of morning birdsong. In the same way, the true nature pervades this whole world. It is in every tree and every stone and every breath and every being. It cannot be seen as a separate thing, because it is not separate from anything. It is what everything is made of. And that, dear one, is what you are. The novice sat with the jar between his hands, the water warm from the morning sun, and he felt, for the first time, something the 12 years of study had pointed toward without ever quite arriving at. The sense that the boundary between himself and the world was thinner than he had ever imagined, and that what lay on the other side of it was not foreign, but familiar, the same substance looking back at him from every direction. "Please," he said again, "tell me more." "So be it, my child." The teaching in these small garden scenes is the Buddhist understanding of interconnection carried to its root. You are not separate from the world. You are a place where the world becomes aware of itself, the way the salt becomes present to itself through the water it has dissolved in. The fig tree does not produce itself out of nothing. It is produced by everything: the rain, the soil, the sun, the wind, the invisible chemistry of growth, the accumulated life of every seed that came before. And you are the same. You were produced by everything: the parents and the grandparents and the great-grandparents, the culture and the language and the landscape, the food you ate and the air you breathed, and the kindness of strangers you never met. All of it is present in you now, as present as the salt in the water, invisible and everywhere. Alan Watts, who spent his life translating Eastern wisdom for Western ears, put it as plainly as it has ever been put. You are something that the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is something that the whole ocean is doing. A wave does not choose to rise. The ocean rises as the wave. The wave does not exist separately from the water. It is the water in motion for a moment before it settles back into the surface from which it came. Nothing is lost when the wave subsides. The water is still there. The ocean is still there. The only thing that ends is the particular shape, and even that is not gone, because the shape was never a thing. It was a movement, and movements do not disappear. They become other movements. Late one evening, in the night hall of a small Zen temple, an old master and a young nun sat together by lamplight. The temple was empty. The other residents had gone to their rooms. The lamp cast a warm circle on the wooden floor, and beyond it, the hall dissolved into darkness. The nun had been with the master for several years, and she trusted him, but she had not yet found the courage to ask the question that had been pressing on her for months. Tonight, with the stillness and the lateness of the hour, she asked it. What happens when this life is over? The master did not answer right away. He watched the lamp flame, which flickered once and then steadied. Then he said, "Let me ask you something first. Suppose that every night, when you went to sleep, you could dream any dream you wished." She waited. On the first night, you might dream of every pleasure you have ever imagined. Every beautiful place, every delicious meal, every form of happiness you have longed for. And it would be real for the full 75 years of a dream lifetime compressed into a single night. That would be extraordinary, she said. It would. And on the second night, you might do the same. And the third. But after a while, you might grow bored with pure pleasure. You might want surprise. And so you would begin to dream of adventures, journeys into the unknown, stories with twists you could not predict. And those dreams would be thrilling. She nodded. And then, after many nights of that, you might want to go further still. You might dream of adventures where real things were at stake, where the outcome was uncertain, where you might fail or lose or be afraid. And those dreams would be vivid and deep and full of feeling. "I think I would," she said. And then the master said, "One night, you might dream the boldest dream of all. You might dream a life in which you forgot that you were dreaming. A life in which the stakes were completely real, in which there was no safety net, in which the joy and the sorrow and the confusion and the beauty were all happening for the first time, with no way of knowing how it would turn out." He paused. The lamp flame held steady. "You might dream," he said, "of being exactly the person you are, sitting in exactly this room, living exactly this life, feeling exactly what you feel right now." The nun sat very still. "And that dream," the master said, "would be the most extraordinary dream of all, because you chose it. Somewhere, at a depth you cannot remember, you chose this, all of this, the whole impossible, beautiful, difficult thing. You chose to forget that you were dreaming, because forgetting is what makes the dream real." The darkness beyond the lamplight seemed to breathe. The nun felt something shift inside her, something very large and very old, as if a wall she had not known she was leaning against had silently moved aside. "Now," the master said, "consider one more thing. Try to imagine what it would be like to fall asleep and never wake up." She sat with it. The thought was vast. "And now," he said, his voice so soft it almost disappeared, "consider what it was like to wake up, having never gone to sleep. That was when you were born. That is when everyone was born. The waking happened without anyone going to sleep first. And if the waking can happen without the sleeping, then the sleeping cannot be the end. It is only another movement of the same ocean." He looked at her. "You are not a puppet that life pushes around. The deep down you, the one beneath every dream and every waking, is the whole of it. The entire ocean. And the wave that you are right now, this particular wave, with this particular shape and this particular height, is the ocean doing what oceans do. Nothing is lost when the wave returns. The water is still the water. The ocean is still the ocean. He let the lamp burn low. The flame shrank to a small gold point, and the circle of light around them narrowed, and the darkness came in close like a friend. "You are not going anywhere," he said. "You never were." The Zen tradition says that trust is the ripened fruit of practice. It is not the beginning. It is what grows, slowly, over years of sitting and watching and letting go, until there is a deep confidence in being itself, in awareness, in the heart, in the fact that the universe has been doing this, all of this, for a very long time and has not made a mistake yet. This trust is different from optimism. Optimism says things will get better. Trust says that whatever happens, the awareness that meets it is equal to it. Trust says that the ocean does not worry about the shape of its waves, because every shape is the ocean. Trust says that the salt does not worry about being invisible in the water, because it is present everywhere. Trust says that you, here, now, in whatever condition you find yourself in, are not separate from the whole, and the whole has been holding you since before you were born. The poet Dina Metzger wrote of gathering everything mangled and bruised in a life and making from it a light and rain and a way to begin again. That is the promise at the bottom of the Buddhist path. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how lost you feel, no matter how far the layers have taken you from the song you were singing before you were born, this is not the end of the story. The clouds open in their own season. The gold is still beneath the clay. The jewel is still in the coat. The face in the mirror is still the face of someone who was loved into being. And the real you, the one this whole evening has been circling, is not the layers, and not the roles, and not the rivers, and not the grief. The real you is the awareness that held all of it, the ocean that waved all of it, the knowing that was never touched by any of it. And it is here. It has always been here. And it is beautiful. O nobly born, remember who you really are. Right now, let the breath do what it has always done, without direction, without control, the way the ocean moves, without deciding to move. Let the body rest inside the breath, like a wave resting inside the water. There is nothing to figure out. There is nothing to achieve. The salt is already in the water. The jewel is already in the coat. The face in the mountain is already your face, and it was yours before anyone told you what to look like. Rest as the ocean. Let the wave be what it is, and know that when it settles, nothing will be lost, because nothing was ever separate from the whole. Breathe. Be here. Be the whole of it. This breath is enough. This moment is the entire sea. This evening began with a question. Who are you? And the answer that has unfolded across stories and teachings and long stretches of listening is both simpler and wider than anything the mind usually offers. You are not the layers that life built around you, though they served you well. You are not the costumes you wore, though they were useful in their season. You are not the rivers of sensation and feeling and thought, though they flow through you without ceasing. You are not the grief, though you honored it. You are not the roles, though you filled them. You are the awareness in which all of it appeared. The one who knew the gold was there before the clay was removed. The one who looked into the water bowl and could not be found in the reflection. The one who sat with the master at dawn and heard, "To whom does it happen?" and recognized, in the silence that followed, that the question was the answer. You are the jewel sewn into the coat by a love so patient it could wait for years. You are the salt dissolved in the water, invisible and everywhere. You are the wave that the ocean is doing, here and now, in this room, in this breath, as particular and as vast as anything the night can hold. The baby in the womb sings, "Oh, do not let me forget who I really am." And the whole of the Buddhist path, the whole of this evening, has been one long answering of that song. You have not forgotten. You are here, and who you really are is, and always was, beautiful. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.